Cool. Am I too loud or is this good? All right. So my standard spiel for every presentation I do, I don't have a whole lot of slides. I think maybe I have 10. Like I'm not going to be offended if I don't go through all of them. Like my point is to have discussions and I want to make this interactive. If you have questions, just stop me, throw something at me. You don't have to wait until the end. So I want to talk, a lot of you have been very active in open source, and DEI obviously is an important topic. And I think the way we've been doing a lot of recognitions haven't been necessarily helpful. So that's the discussion I want to have. And if you have any feedback on this, or if you have any comments, I can feel free to stop me. Oops. My cursor is not in the right place. Sorry about that. No, I've lost it. Okay. All right. Cool. A lot of you know me already. I started working on open source community management around 2014, 2015 timeframe when I joined the Linux Foundation. And I was there for about 4 years, involved in several networking related projects. When I joined, there was only one large networking project in 2014, which was Open Daylight. And now they have, I don't even know how many, it's probably close to a dozen projects under LF networking umbrella. So after about 4 years there, I went to GitLab in middle of 2018. And GitLab, as you know, from day one, they started with a contributor and open source ethos, and was happy to, play a part and continue to grow the contributor base for about 2 years while I was there. And almost 2 years ago, it's amazing how time flies. I was talking to my old colleagues at GitLab that are here. Almost 2 years ago, I joined Cube. Have you heard of Cube or CubeDev? Okay, Mary has. But so we're in the business intelligence data analytics space, which is a new space for me. But a lot of the users and contributors in that space in the beginning, a lot of them were internal developers working in IT. They want to create a common definition of a common metrics based on, for example, a point of sales data, and they want to be able to do a data modeling in consistent fashion so everybody has the same definition and tie it to your whatever framework, front-end framework you're using, like React or others. But now, recently, you're able to, using our SQL API, you can tie it to whatever business intelligence tool that you use, whether it's Metabase or Tableau and others. But yeah, this is not meant to be a sales pitch, but if you want to learn more, feel free to stop me and check out our website. So we'll talk about why recognitions are important. This seems like a rhetorical question, but I'll share three main reasons why I think it's important in open source. Talk about some of the typical recognitions you've seen in a lot of communities, and I'll present some of the negative examples, and those are all mine. These are the mistakes that I made, and I'm not picking on other communities because they're not inclusive. These are the mistakes that I made. So feel free to poke holes on what I've done, and I'll talk about what challenges they present and how we go about addressing those. So why are recognitions important? I think three things. First thing is very obvious. It's important to, in general in life, whether it's in open source or high tech or wherever, you need to thank people to really show them your appreciation for what they do, especially in remote communities. So whether somebody's done, remove a technical debt your community's been carrying for a couple of years. Somebody takes the initiative to fix that huge bug that you've been carrying. That's obviously amazing. And I don't recommend you doing this because I lived through it. Somebody in our old community decided to migrate the wiki tool. And you can just imagine how well that goes. And, I was recipient of a lot of the arrows too, because I was on the foundation staff that sort of supported that person. But if somebody does that, it's not for the faint of heart. You're just getting arrows thrown at you for weeks, but I mean, at the end, it worked out well. So they're still using that new wiki tool. But a couple of community members who sort of took the lead on this, I don't think they got a lot of good night's sleep for a few weeks. But if somebody does something amazing like that, it's important to thank them. And the second reason is, I mean, every community has like your ethos or values that you aspire to. I mean, it could be written down as community values. I mean, you have written community code of conduct. When somebody exemplifies what you value, like collaboration, diversity and inclusion, and teamwork and other areas. If somebody sort of role models those values, it's important to sort of highlight that, like, make it apparent that we mean what we say, especially for new community members that are joining. So it's sort of, highlighting the role model and then highlighting to the community members that, those values are indeed important. And the third one is sort of, celebration. Like, even if you're taking like 2 minutes during like a technical steering committee call to say, hey, this person, Mark, he, fixed these like 5 bugs in the last 2 weeks. And it's important to sort of pause and sort of recognize that, because what happens a lot in remote asynchronous environment is that the meetings are just very task-based. So you go through agenda items, you sort of try to knock discussion points out and get things done, and you just very focus on that. Whereas if you're in a traditional office environment, it's easy to stop by somebody's cube and just give somebody a high five, right? Which is very hard to replicate in remote environments. So I think it's important, even if you have to carve out, like, even if it's an only hour meeting, carve out 2-3 minutes, like every few weeks, to say, I want to highlight these people for a great job they've done and thank them. So I think, keeping the community fun and celebratory, it's pretty important. So what have we seen in the past? And like I said, for people who walked in late, these are some of the mistakes I made as I'm managing different communities. So, I mean, you go to different events and you'll see like charts like this. I mean, one on your left is like number of like a PRs or MRs merged by community members. So, I mean, these are all like made up numbers, but I think you'll get the point. Like, one of the contributors, he or she had 250 PRs merged in a year, and the next person had about 200, so on and so forth. In the second chart on your right, you see a lot of foundations do this. It's not just the LF, but other foundations sort of publish reports like this. And however you define contributions in your community, in your projects, and you have all these member companies that are contributing, and they sort of try to quantify how many people made contributions, whether it's code, whether it's even discussions on mailing lists, or contributing to wiki, et cetera, and you sort of quantify them and sort of list, company A had 15 people contributing to this project X, et cetera. There are a couple of issues with this, and that you could probably point out others as well. First problem is there's a tendency still today to focus on code contributions, which, back in the day, like, maybe 10, 15 years ago, when open source projects were mostly by and for developers, that may have made sense, because most of the collaboration are happening around code. But that's really not the case anymore. Like, I mentioned I got involved in a lot of networking projects around like 2014 and 15. Even then, I noticed there are a lot of telco operators like AT&Ts, T-Mobiles, and China Mobiles of the world. They don't necessarily have a lot of developer resources like vendors like Ericsson or Huawei, but they have great insights on like use cases. If somebody's working on a feature, like, you want like an actual user, potential users, to have feedback on, this is the use case that you're not addressing, or you need to tweak your work slightly. So if you're just only focused on code, you kind of miss out on those other members of the community that are contributing. And the second is, you probably know, like, along with Don, I've been part of the chaos community for a long time. So obviously I'm a big fan of metrics and I use them. But if you focus too much on metrics, you a lot of times you lose a context of contribution, or you just miss out on things that's very hard to quantify. So those are the two major problems that I've seen on approaches like this. But can you think of other issues with these approaches of like potentially recognizing people? I can just move on, but I'll probably like come back to this in a bit. But what about, like, let's talk about other contributions. I think a lot of communities these days in open source are moving away from things like IRC or mailing lists because, I mean, to be honest, like nobody ever loved mailman, although they're still around. A lot of communities are moving to like Slack or Discord or even like Mattermost. And there are a lot of, this happens in every community. There are certain people that are really good about making new people feel welcome, like providing them, like answering their questions, patiently answering their questions, although those questions have been asked like a number of times, and pointing them to onboarding resources or really answering those questions. And those things are really hard to tease out sometimes unless you're reading through all the channels. And as a community manager, this hasn't happened for a while. For a couple of years, I felt like I was getting calls or pinged on LinkedIn like every few months about another startup trying to automate or streamline that are developing a tool to sort of streamline your management of Slack conversations. Like they'll have like dashboards or metrics about these are how many people are contributing, these are how many threads that are happening, et cetera, et cetera. So they may tell you the volume of conversation that somebody's contributing to, but they don't really tell you like, was that individual asking a lot of questions, or was that person like really helpful, like answering like people like that are coming on board. So that's I fully understand it. Those are extremely hard to quantify, right? So you can't really get a sense of that unless you like dig through the conversations in long threads. The other thing, I've had this from some of our community members at Cube. There's a software company that's been using our software for about 1.5 years, and they're looking for ways to contribute back to our community. They didn't have developer resources to help make technical contributions. And they noticed that we have what we call user stories. These are similar to our case studies. And they said, can I help write up a user story based on our use case? And I said, that's awesome. It was, I think by then we only had like 5 or 6 user stories, and this was the first one in the software industry, and this was the first one that was using Snowflake. So this use case is worth its weight in gold, because I just had a call with somebody the other day. I said, is anybody in your community using Snowflake? So there you go, here's a link, right? So if you think about Lewis's contribution from Simon Data, it looks like one contribution, but it's extremely valuable. So you can't just say he just did one thing in 2021 and say that was the end of the contribution. So that becomes problematic. Like if you try to quantify everything, it just doesn't give you the whole context of what this particular individual has done. The other thing, the third one I want to point out, the bottom two diagrams sort of go hand in hand. When somebody comes into a community for the first time, and I've been involved in a lot of communities, I still go through this imposter syndrome. Like I don't quite know what to do. I don't know everybody, so people feel uncomfortable. And then it's sometimes I don't even feel like submitting a PR or opening an issue, because I don't want to, I don't want to lose my face to a certain extent. Like somebody may have opened this issue before, and maybe this was discussed, and I don't want to rock the boat. This happens a lot, and this is also somewhat cultural too. Especially I grew up in I spent part of my youth in Korea. Losing your face is a big deal culturally. If you make I think I've been speaking for about 15 minutes. I'm sure I've made at least a dozen grammar mistakes already. I mean, not that I don't care, but I got over that, right? But people from Asian cultures whose first language is in English, it's almost like a big source of embarrassment. That's one of the reasons why they don't want to speak out for the fear of making a mistake. So they don't always want to do stuff in public until they feel comfortable or confident that no one's going to make fun of my accent or grammar. Until they gain that confidence, you might just have like a one-on-one interaction, like over like Slack or Zoom, right? And because that's what they're more comfortable with. And like speaking of user story, I found a user in Indonesia. They were collecting a lot of POS data because they were sort of in the retail industry, especially in food services. And I noticed like he was starting a lot of threads and asking interesting questions. And I said, you should do a user story because that's pretty interesting. It's in the new geography, like the point of sales industry. And he said, sure. But he never wanted to get on the phone because he was very like uncomfortable like speaking English, like which you wouldn't know conversing with that person on Slack. Like his English was like more than adequate. And we just collaborated over Google Docs and Slack. In a week, we had a blog post like ready to go. But that was his comfort level, right? I mean, maybe like he was constantly using like a Google Translate all the time while he was typing those messages on Google Docs or Slack. But you want to give that person an opportunity, like if they're comfortable, like, contributing like this in this space, then give that person the space, right? Don't force that person to, do everything in the open when they're not ready yet. So, I mean, and some of that is cultural, right? And then that was like the first time I ever collaborated with somebody like without getting on the phone ever, but it worked out pretty well. And hopefully he thought it was worth his time too. And this was my major learning, and this is the sort of an inspiration for why I wanted to sort of give this talk. I gave a similar talk at FOSDEM earlier this year. Not everyone is comfortable with public recognition. They just rather have somebody, I'm making a office analogy. They just want somebody to come to their queue, give them a high five, and be done with it. They don't want to stand on stage. They don't want to be publicly recognized, and that's completely fine, right? And the other reason why I thought about this a lot last year was that we have, like other communities, like we did at GitLab, we have a heroes program to sort of recognize top contributors. I mean, our ranks of heroes isn't that large. We currently have only 4 people, but even when I started, I wanted to sort of, find out who the regular contributors were and what kind of contributions they made. And during the process of last year, I reached out to a few people, like, I think you would make a great hero. I'd like you to extend an invite and become one of our heroes. And their responses were almost identical. They says, I don't think I've done enough. Like, I don't think I really qualified to be a hero. And then turned out, I don't know if it was a coincidence or not, they're both female. And so that sort of had me worried because this reminded me of like when you have a job description, you have 10 bullet points. And if typically like, typical male engineers in Silicon Valley, if they've done like 7 of them, I've done Python, I know MySQL, then they'll just apply. Whereas female, well, I haven't done like 3 of those things, so I don't think I'm qualified. That's sort of the mindset from underrepresented community. So I was kind of worried about that. Is there a problem with my recruiting pitch, or is this the way the program's sort of been presented to them? So I reached out to 2 of my former managers who are both female and pretty active in DEI initiatives, and said, here's our webpage, and here's sort of how I've been identifying, approaching people. Like, can you see any issues with what we've been doing? And then both of them actually said, what's your goal for this program? Like, no matter what it's called. And so what I told them was it's not just recognition, although, I mean, as community managers, I think we all like recognizing people. That's part of it. But what I told both of them was that I wanted to have sort of a trusted advisor group that I can reach out to in the future. Like whether we're making big product changes, like we want to change the user interface, I want to reach out to these core group of people, or I want to come up with a new policy for our community, and I want to have a core group of people that I can ping for advice and sort of guidance. And both of them says, then why don't you present it like that? Like, they obviously like contributing and helping people. Maybe that's what they're motivated. Maybe that's their main motivation, rather than because they thought I was just focusing way too much on like recognizing them. It's like sort of anointing them as heroes, and they weren't like overly concerned, but the term heroes they didn't think was too like friendly to all segments of the population. I mean, I think when I hear the word heroes, I think of like a Marvel heroes, I guess, and is that like necessarily inclusive? That's another thing that we can think about. So we even thought about like changing the names, but we obviously didn't go that far. But we just made a tweak to how I approach people. I don't really mention recognition first, and then we obviously change our wording and positioning on our web pages to hopefully that's a little bit more friendly. So that's one of the things that I went through with a few individuals last year. And then while doing that, I sort of had to do more like unpacking, I guess, or reflection. It's like, am I doing this to really thank them and even recognize people, or am I trying to show off how cool our community is, right? And then if I was being completely honest, there was some element to that. Like I want to show off what kind of cool people we have, and I mean that's kind of fun thing to do, but that shouldn't be my main motivation. It's why am I really recognizing people? That should be my main concern. Let's see. Cool. So how do we go about making our recognitions more inclusive? I mean, this is pretty obvious. I said a few slides ago, we need to look beyond code. And even if you look at the code, like let's say you look at GitLab or GitHub repo, and somebody added this amazing feature because they worked for a long time, and we have this like a new bells and whistle to our product that we didn't have before. I almost guarantee you, like outside of activities on the repo, there are other people that help like adding that feature or removing the technical debt. Because that's why I try to get on the phone or Zoom call with the individual. Like I like to learn more about like your reasons for contributing and what was sort of involved. And typically there'll be other people that help with like things like testing that would never show up on as in the commit records. So if I just if I just recognize that one person who showed up on GitHub, then I'm excluding like potentially several people that have sort of helped out with that work. So I sort of make it a point, like before I like reach out to people, I can't guarantee that it happens all the time, to really understand like what kind of work was involved and who else sort of helped out, so that I'm more inclusive. I talked about metrics. One of the things I like to do, I mean, this sort of related to what I said about reaching out to people before I recognize them publicly for their contributions is, I mean, one of the things like every community managers do is you have like a virtual coffee chat with them. Like it's become a norm since the pandemic. And, try to get better understanding or context in terms of why they contributed and what was sort of involved. And it's important to, we have a Notion page of my conversations with community members. I mean, I thought about, like, we also use Orbit for our dashboarding. I mean, I try not to like instrument things too much. Like I might record those conversations to give proper context to their work. But I think what I see very often in a lot of communities is that they spend way too much time like instrumenting stuff or trying to make it and turn something into a metrics when it doesn't like necessarily make sense. So I mean, Don, you may have heard me mention this book. There's a book called Tyranny of Metrics. Like I said, I'm a big fan of metrics. I use them all the time, but there's a point where there's like a point of diminishing return. And that's what this Professor Mueller talks about in his book. He's a history professor, and then he found a problem in academia. Like there are way too much time, people are spending way too much time to get funding, like instrumenting stuff, like trying to quantify everything. And rather than spending resources on like maybe teaching students at universities, but they're just hiring staff to like instrument things. So just a word of caution. And the other reason why I like to have these conversations is that almost every time I talk to them, they want to find other ways that they can contribute to the community. So, you're thanking them for the work they've done, but they're saying, besides like, helping you triage bugs, like, is there something else that I can do? Or is there other like insight I can provide? And so I definitely like those conversations, and those things like you're not going to get when you try to like instrument things like beyond what's even necessary. Cool. So what other things should we be thinking about for recognitions? I mean, one is, I've done this like when I was at the LF, we had like a 6-month release cycle. So we do like a big recognitions like every time we do a release. But that's nice. Like every 6 months we have this big celebration, either in person or virtually, to celebrate people's recognition. But what I sometimes neglected to do was like recognize somebody on the spot. When somebody did something great, like, streamline the wiki page, for example, just thank them on the spot, even if it's just a DM, right? Rather than waiting until like when the release is done, and 6 months later, the person may have moved on to something different, or you just lose the context, right? So go ahead, sir.
Forgive me being
Yeah.
late.
No.
How large is the community you're talking about?
So good question. So I've been involved in several projects at the LF. And so OPNFE was one of the projects they rebranded since then. I think at their peak, they probably had about 200 to 300 active contributors. And obviously GitLab was my next journey in open source that had typically about 1,000 people that are making contributions to our repo. And right now at Cube, I would probably say 50 to 100. So, but anyhow. Yeah, so, and then I think, like, I appreciate that question, because if your community gets large, like, then it becomes worse. Like, if you wait even a month to, like, thank somebody, you've sort of lost the opportunity to a certain extent. I guess it's better late than never, but, if you see something, just thank them on the spot, like, whether it's a DM or something else. And two, so, for community managers, swag or merchandise sometimes can become like a vein, it just takes a lot of your time sometimes, and you have to ask yourself, just like instrumentation, am I overdoing this? Because if you think about it, it's really not about the merchandise. Like, nobody's motivated to do something because they got a $25 t-shirt or even a $50 backpack, right? I mean, if that's their motivation, then I think you have a different problem. So don't stress too much about like a merchandise, and because it's difficult to pick the right ones that meets like everyone's needs. So you need to be like very thoughtful about that, and that's not exclusive. I made this mistake at GitLab. I handed out like different colored baseball caps, and then certain parts of Europe. I think like certain parts of Europe, you see more people like wearing baseball caps. I think UK is like one of them. Not as many as you do in the US. But if you go to like Greece, like it's almost like unheard of, is what they told me. So like, that was a learning for me. They weren't offended or anything, but it wasn't as valuable as people in the US or like even Japan or Korea, where it's more of a baseball playing country, right? So. And this wasn't necessarily recognition. We do a technical workshop at Cube, and as a thank you for somebody filling out a post-event survey, we used to send out like trinkets, like power cables. I'm forgetting like multi-tools, et cetera, et cetera. And somebody from Berlin sent me an email saying, "Please don't send me anything because I'm trying to reduce my carbon footprint." And basically it was a nudge, like, why are you doing this? Like, you're like, I appreciate this, but this is like a $15, 20 item, and you're spending another 15, 20 item on shipping, and I'm not helping the environment, right? So I switched tack. Like the last few months, we've been making donations on their behalf to organizations like the Last Mile or Girls Who Code, rather than spending the money on sending out trinkets. So I appreciated that nudge. From the community member in Germany to remind us it's not just about swag. The third one, letting community members participate in the recognition process. So my favorite example, again, is with OPNFE. Like we used to have annual summits, and the highlight of that summit at the last day, the last item was sort of everybody gets together in a ballroom, and we do recognitions. And we also award like top contributors. What was meaningful was that all the nominations and votings were done by community members. Like I didn't have a vote because I was a foundation staff member. All I did was to administer the vote on Condorcet, help with the nomination process, hand out the award. That was it. But I think for people, I think we like selected like we had like a fun giveaways too for people, like for example, people who helped with the wiki migration that year. I gave them like a snow shovel, like because they had to shovel stuff out of the way. But the top contributors, when you talk to them, they said it was more meaningful because it came from the community. It wasn't the technical steering committee chair or board member like anointing somebody who came from community members. So it just really made it a lot of fun. And it was like very grassroots. And something I did at GitLab, I had like a nomination form. It's just a simple Google form because the community, we had 1,000 people contributing like each year just on the repo. It's hard to know what's all going on. So I said, if you see somebody's done a great work, just please send in a Google form so I can reach out to them. To be honest, it wasn't as like active as I liked it to be. I probably should have done a better job of sort of advertising it, but I kind of like that grassroots aspect too. Like we'll reach out to them and sort of highlight them, but that's something else that you can probably consider doing. Final talking point here, avoid ranking contributions or organizations. And that goes back to this slide here. Although your intention wasn't to rank people, it's hard not to look at it that way without the context, right? So especially the chart on the right, the larger the organization, you have a clear advantage, right? If you have 10,000 people versus like a 50-person startup, you're just not going to have the same amount of resources or bandwidth to contribute to an open source project. So how does that make you feel if you're coming from a 50 or 70-person startup company, right? And then same thing with like individual contributors. This comes up like, especially at my current role or even at GitLab, like we'll talk about contributors like internally, and then one of the questions that would inevitably come up is that, can we ask these people to do more? I said, okay, so how I would answer that question is, I think we should be asking how can we make it easier for them to contribute more, rather than burn more of your spare time. Because unlike foundation-based projects, they're not like paid from their companies to contribute to your projects, right? So like, I don't want to ask people to spend less time with their family or their hobbies or even watching a soccer game, which is what they enjoy doing. Like, that's like, I don't feel comfortable like asking like active contributors to do more, because that's problematic. Like, I'm not being sensitive to their needs. And one of the things we did, this wasn't the work I did, our engineers did this at GitLab. They made like what GitLab development kit more usable for different audiences, better user interface, easier to install on your laptop, etc. So lowering the barrier to entry to making it easy, that makes sense, but we should probably not be asking people, can you just do more? Like, can you submit like 10 more PRs like this year? That just doesn't feel right. So, cool. Some final thoughts. Yeah, so, obviously a big realization for me last year was, remember the reasons for recognizing your community members. It's not to show off. It's not just to show off to the rest of the world what kind of cool people have in your community, although that's nice, but, think of the real reasons why you're recognizing people. And we tend to, I mean, at least I did in my life, focus on how much somebody's contributing rather than what and how and where, right? And especially outside of your code base, like, how are people, like, how they're working together, how they're collaborating. So I think where and how is more important than how much in most cases. And yeah, this is sort of repeating what I'm saying, like, as you're recognizing people, try to understand, it's impossible to talk to everyone. I understand that. Like, I can't do that either, but try to get more context into, what motivated them to contribute and, what their experience was like. Yeah, because I don't think I mentioned this. They'll, during those conversations, you'll get a feedback on, what your onboarding document wasn't very clear on how like XYZ works. So those feedbacks like very valuable, and then I think having those interactions like pretty important. And the final thing, I've seen, like, I forget which community it was, and I'm trying not to pick on any community either. They've had like a top contributor program. I don't know what the name was. I don't know if it was Hero or somebody else. They had like 3 tiers. Yeah, if you do this, you're on bronze. Like, I'm just making that up. And if you do this much, then you're a silver. And if you do more, then you're gold. Or it's almost like a open source foundation membership, right? And when I looked at that, and this goes back to quantity issue, right? Like, are you really, encouraging people to spend more time on like contributing to your project versus spending time with your family or other hobbies? So I didn't find that too like inspiring when I saw that. And then that also felt like, to me, felt very transactional. Like, because I mean, you should be all about relationship building with your community members versus saying, oh, you did this much, so I'm going to give you this. You did this much, and I'm going to give you a different trinket. That felt like a somewhat transactional. So I would think carefully before we're doing this. The only time when you're having those different tiers make sense, that based on my experiences, when you're having a fun, almost like a context type activity in a limited window. So let's say some community has like a bug triaging event over like a 24-hour period, right? And if somebody, triage like this much, you can have like a different tiers, almost like a fun contest, and you're not required to participate, but I think that's fine. Like, I think that could work, but you don't want to be like overtaxing people either. So there's a fun balance. So if you sort of time bound things and make it a sort of a fun activity versus, assigning value to somebody's contribution, I think that could work. But yeah, when I was like looking through different like recognition programs at different companies, when I saw that at that company's website, that kind of made me think a bit about trying not to be transactional with your community members. As I said, I gave this similar talk at FOSDEM, and I made a blog post on opensource.com. That's summarized pretty much what I said. If you have any comments, like, feel free to leave them there. I forgot to ask like questions of you, and feel free to like ask me questions as well. Have you seen like good like recognitions that you thought that was cool, or maybe you're a recipient of it and you still remember it after like 10 years? I don't know if you have good examples, but go ahead, Ben.
So I'm biased.
There we go.
So I'm biased, but I'm really fond of Fedora's Badges system because it doesn't really cost us any money. We don't have to send stuff to people. And it's a way that we can provide pretty instant recognition across a variety of ways. So some of them are tied to pushing commits to repos, but there's also things like editing wiki pages, changing your password, adding your time zone into the account system, things like that. So it's really diverse across a broad array. And then you people can request new badges. So talk about like making it open to the community to participate. So you say, oh, I'm going to run this event. Can we have a badge for that? Or here's a thing that I think we should recognize. Let's make a badge. And so it's just a way to kind of gamify things, and it encourages people when they look at what badges are available. I know I've done it, like, oh, I could earn this badge by running the kernel regression test suite. I'm going to go do that. And I never
Right.
would have done it had I not seen that there was a badge for it.
Okay. So is this like a virtual badge thing that shows up on people's profiles?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, some level of gamification, I think it can make it fun, and I think those are completely appropriate, I think. Any other comments or questions? I mean, that kind of reminds me of like one of the TSC chairs that I work with. I think he's still at Nokia. He gave an example. We were talking about like a recognition in general. I think we're like nearing the end of the release cycle or something. And he said there was a project, open source project he worked on like 15 years ago when he was at Nokia. I think he's still there. And then they gave out some trinket. And he said he still has it on his desk at his office because it just brings a lot of good memories about people that he worked with. It's just a lot of emotional meaning. It doesn't I don't know how much it costs, but it's just like a nice little trinket that reminds him of the community that he enjoyed working with. And he said that just means a lot because it also came from community. And I think we all have like examples of those, like in our desk, like even if it's in the desk drawer, that just you feel an instant connection with that community member, although you left like 15 years ago, right? So those are, so obviously it's not about, creative swag or tchotchkes. It's about, emotional connection with the rest of the community and giving you a sense of belonging. So go ahead.
So I have a number of questions.
Yeah.
I don't want to dominate
No, it's okay.
my back is to everybody, so I can't tell if anyone
Yep.
else wants to.
Can you feel free to use the mic?
So I run a nonprofit that does open source hardware things, but it's very different than what you have. Like I don't have a community of 100, so I talk to every single person on my team, and so it's a very, very different situation. My question for you is, when let's say someone shows up to a software project, makes a pull request, right? Like, how many pull requests do they make before they typically talk to a human being in the community? And is the sense of community all electronic, like they code review someone else's pull request? Or is it formed by like little events and virtual meetings and things that you have?
Right. So thanks for the question. So, I mean, and then feel free to just stop me if I'm not heading in the right direction, your spirit of your question. Somebody like responding to your pull requests, I mean, although it's not like over the phone or Zoom or anything, like, I mean, I set a goal of like within 5 business days, somebody should at least acknowledge it, even if it's like adding labels or just, especially if it's a first contribution, I like to put at least like an emoji, like a thumbs up. There should be a good hygiene. Like it's not just me, but somebody from the engineering team needs to constantly look at that, gets it labeled, and then say acknowledge that we see it. No guarantee on when it's going to be merged or closed or any of that, but at least like a first acknowledgement should happen pretty instantaneously. I think for a lot of communities, these happen like virtually. But if you have the budget for this, like big projects like Kubernetes or CNC, or all the CNCF projects, there's a reason why people get together. They're still meeting twice a year, right? The CNCF yeah. So I mean, it builds like enormous like value for your community members to get together, and you could have like a hackathon that'll go along with the summit, so to speak, so people actually collaborate in person and really get to like thank people in person. That's important. But even if that's not possible, like what I try to do is if I see an interesting contribution and no guarantee that I'm going to catch all of them, I like to just reach out and say, hey, I'd like to jump on a call with you, like no matter what time zone you're in. So within a reasonable time frame, and I'm amazed that they feel like almost honored that they're approached by somebody from the company. And then it's just, even before I send them something, they just feel appreciated and feel connection because they like the technology and they just they feel very welcome, and then they feel comfortable, like not only using the software but being actively involved. So hopefully that answered most of your question, but please let me know if I haven't. Yeah.
It does. I've never.
Yeah, sorry.
I've submitted pull requests and bug fixes to small projects, and I used to maintain an open source project, but I've never been a part of a large team of hundreds that did this. So I don't understand how the social interaction on such a large team works. So I think you did answer my question, that someone who's a first-time committer has at least some chance of a human interaction, even if it's a 2% chance. But as they do more, they're going to have electronic email interaction with members of the team, and that forges at least some sense of community.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so I think to a certain extent, automation in either GitHub or GitLab really helps. I mean, we're doing this in my current role at Cube, and we did this at GitLab too. If the contribution comes in from the community, it gets immediately labeled community contribution, or you can pick whatever label you like, and then I subscribe to those labels, right? So I see them, and what I would do today, and even at GitLab, I would look at which part of the product it is. I would assign it to the lead engineer. Say, hey, Mark, can you look at this? And sort of, so they know which team is sort of responsible for reviewing their contribution. So even if it's not completely like personal, like automation I think helps. I don't think people will view it as being impersonal, so they know, at least they know like somebody saw it and somebody's going to take a look at it. So go ahead, Don. Yeah. Sorry.
Just to add to that a little bit, I think, when you're thinking about these large open source projects, you actually need to think about them as smaller sub-projects. So if you look at Kubernetes, it's dozens of smaller sub-projects, and people tend to focus in on very specific areas. The other thing that's different about these very large projects is they often have loads of project meetings that are over Zoom that anyone can drop into. So a lot of people can just drop into one of the weekly meetings for a particular area or for the whole project, and you can get some personal interaction that way as well. So don't think of the large projects as being less personal than the smaller ones, because I think in some ways they're actually probably more personal because they've learned to do this at scale.
Yeah. And Don, I think you're part of I think at least you were like part of the onboarding team in the Kubernetes community, right? So.
I was. I'm less
Okay.
involved in that now,
Yeah.
but I'm involved in the CNCF contributor strategy technical advisory
Cool.
group now, which is
Yeah.
kind of the same thing. It's how do you
I know you're not going to be offended. Hey, Don, like, who do I reach out about this PR I submitted? And then Don could direct people to appropriate places. And we also had a page at GitLab, and so we would have list product managers and engineering managers for different areas of our product. I mean, not everybody's able to find them because we have so many like handbook and web pages, but having those pages like helpful, like, hey, if you have any questions about who you need to ping on your merge request or PR, like here's a list of people. And I've seen other communities do that too. They'll list like what we call PTL, like a project team lead. So at least you know who to sort of escalate it to if you don't think you're getting the response that you need. So. Yeah, I mean, so even if the project's big with thousands of contributors, I've seen like a lot of communities do them really well. So, other questions? Oh, go ahead. So I'll bring the mic. All right, thank you.
So I wanted to get thoughts on ways to, and I missed some of the first part about just any of the chat groups or other communication methods that might be part of these communities. But thoughts on ways of encouraging maybe participants within the community to do some type of like peer recognition and engagement rather than it just
Right.
being like kind of the leaders and owners of the community that have the responsibility for being engaged in recognizing, but to have at least more of that scaling of, as peers, how do we recognize and support and encourage each other as well to
Right.
keep building on that versus it just being like a lot more of that hierarchical, because
Right.
it's great to get that from leadership, but also there's a lot
Right.
more of the contributors versus the leaders and
Right.
owners of the community.
No, I completely agree. I all about grassroots recognition. That's why like a nomination forms help. And like we don't have that at Cube. I mean, maybe we're at a point where we need to institute something along those lines. But sometimes people just ping me and say, Ray, have you like seen this person like answering all these questions on Slack? And sometimes because it's in a channel that I normally don't subscribe to, like I completely missed it, right? And then I don't think I was being lazy, but I really appreciate when those people sort of reach out to me. And yeah, I mean, like whether it's like a formalized like a Google form or just, you know, make it known to your community members. If you need to tell like somebody in the community management team or elsewhere about somebody's great work, I think that makes complete sense. And I think it's more genuine as well. So. Yeah, I mean, one of the heroes that we added to our ranks recently was he still to this day, like I mean, he told me he's like addicted to Slack, which, okay, like I won't go there, but he said he's thinks that he needs to like read all of them, like almost like instantaneously. That's why he's so good about, like he said, it's not just our Slack, like his company Slack too. He's like, he's on top of things. Like, I don't know how, but, and you know, he's been so helpful, like onboarding like new community members and answering questions. I thought he was very deserving, and he's one of the active members today. So. Any other questions? Or really appreciate you coming on a beautiful Sunday afternoon. You could be down in Manhattan Beach, but I mean, FOSDEM is a different animal because first weekend of February in Brussels, the weather is like iffy, so you can understand people being in a room. Like in Southern California, not so much. So, thank you, and I'll be around if you have other questions. I mean, feel free to ping me on Slack or on the blog post on opensource.com, and have a safe trip home if you're traveling. So, thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. I
talk?
I mean, like, I can try.
Also, are these talks videoed at all?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Who are you with again?
Invoca?
Invoca, what do you guys do?
We're a conversational intelligence platform.
Okay, cool.
So it's like more like a security talk.
Oh, dope, dude. Here. Let me check out, let me make sure this is your run right here. 0564.
I feel like these talks like have been in general like pretty low attendance.
I think also the fact that it's the first one since COVID that did want attendance, you know, it's like, that's like the last one. So it's actually a pretty low. Oh wait, so I got a super nerdy one. If we're nerdy out about that, I was on, I went to this like brush town in Colorado last year, and I like on there was this like old dude working in the back of the car I'm sitting in. I started talking to him. It turns out they worked at SCaLE Labs and it's for cheap copies developing the C programming language. Just like started telling me stories about cranking it and stuff. Okay, so yeah, that Wi-Fi or that Ethernet run right at the front, that's gonna be for you.
Okay. So I've never honestly used Ethernet on this.
All right,
Yeah.
we gonna learn today.
Okay, thanks. I was like joking about it, but like I'm not like totally joking. I'm gonna like pay people. I'm gonna be like, dude, come to my conference. I'll pay you for this.
Oh no, you're gonna be fine. What are you just like nervous or something?
I'm nervous, but also I feel like if people don't come to your talk and there's like 10 people in your talk, then it almost is like more self-conscious because you feel like more of a loser. Like,
Nah, dude. Honestly, like, what the fuck is there right on this conference? Like, let's be real. I'm wearing a shirt that says Run GCC.
oh yeah, I forgot
Like,
about that.
yeah, no, like honestly, if anything, like if you only get a couple of people, those people are gonna be really into whatever you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'll come to your talk anyway.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. I will be here.
Send me a check afterwards.
A check for what? You send me a check. Okay, it doesn't look like they have. Some people had like fancy little Wi-Fi connectors. Why don't you open this guy up? Let's get you connected to the Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Now, especially with like less people, I think you should be okay to just use the Wi-Fi.
Okay, it's H honors.
No,
Samka?
no. This will be SCaLE. Let's try the fast one first. Password is Crocat. Okay. So go ahead and fiddle around with that, and if that doesn't work, we'll put you on the quote-unquote slow network, which is just the 2.4
Okay.
gigahertz channel.
Okay, so this seems like, and then say like, okay, cool. So this is working,
Okay, cool.
and then,
Let's get you connected. So you need to use the projector as well, yes?
yeah.
I guess it's this. You don't have HDMI on this guy, do you?
Yeah, I actually do.
You do?
Yeah, the newest MacBook has an H. This one? I know, it's taken so long. Also, they rolled back their touch bar.
I get so sassy about Apple's really poor decisions with their hardware. 'Cause I'm like, guys,
But feel this. Pick it up.
military grade Apple hardware.
Right?
So I wanted to like Apple more, but like when I went back to school later in life to get my computer science degree because I was sick of working as a chef and an audio engineer,
Okay.
and like I bought an MSI computer from the Newegg that has 6 USB ports. It's got oh my god, it's got an SD card reader and
Okay, okay, good.
Here, I will sit around and make sure that you were like good.
Okay, so how do you share just one tab?
How do you share just one tab?
So you can do like speaker notes.
I would guess if you, what you got? What are you hosting on?
So it's actually called Mentimeter, so that like it's more interactive.
Okay. Oh, so you want to be able to, how about you start trying to present it like you would, and let's see if you run into any problems.
Okay, so so this is just displaying screen, and then how do you do like presenting on a MacBook with an
Oh, have you not run your presentation on this computer yet?
I have, but I mean like, I run it on like Zoom, but not like on a, we got 30 minutes, we can figure this out.
Yep.
Okay.
Why don't you just like click the present button or whatever on this, because I'm not familiar with the platform.
Okay,
you're
so,
This is the Mac.
yeah,
She's on a Mac, yeah.
I don't figure out go to the Amy room.
okay.
They're the ones who.
Okay, so
You
that's
see, so this is not right now sharing the screen, but if you
okay,
go like
that's good to know.
system preferences maybe,
Here.
or should we go to
Might
the
be
AV?
maybe displays. Actually, go into system preferences. Let's look at the displays, maybe.
Wait, escape. File. We were talking about how I'm like sending checks to anyone who comes to my talk.
Steve, we're getting paid today.
Oh, hey, there you go.
Hold on. I'm gonna do some Google food real quick.
Okay. Just because I was like going to the other talks and there's like 15 people there, so I was like, I'm gonna personally recruit people to my
You're
talk.
gonna do fine. Don't even worry about it.
If Trump could do it, starting his first presidential.
Shit, Steve, bring out the nuclear arsenal right away.
Actually, it was the second president. Look what it got again.
It was actually, it's really cute. My grandfather was like, SJ, is like the talk gonna be recorded because like I really want to watch it all. He's like, my level of cyber is like checking my emails, but like I want to listen to your whole talk.
I want to see you be smart.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, Grandpa, like you're the only one that's gonna be listening for the full hour. Like,
Actually, quite a few people. We have it streaming on YouTube, so if you look, there's like, oh, there's a couple hundred people. YouTube.
oh wow, nice.
Hopefully that. Please.
Maybe let's try unplugging it.
Okay.
So you ideally want to like share this, and then you have like another note
Yeah.
screen that you want to use. Okay.
Let's do Apple sharing one
Yeah.
one screen
To projector, perhaps.
to projector. HDMI. Connect. Okay.
'Cause we're already connected. Oh, now there's no input.
Well, I took it out.
That's the projector.
And you weren't able to drag anything over there. Here, plug it back in really quick. Let's see if that's just like literally it's a second screen and it thinks it's like right here or on the other side of your screen, and just drag it onto the projector.
Oh, cool.
You know what I'm saying?
That'd be cool. Okay, so like if I could go
Yeah,
like this.
or other side maybe. Oh, yeah! There we
nice.
go. We did it.
Okay, this is great.
There you go.
So now, wait. Now we
Now
just
full screen it.
Wait.
You can do it. Oh, you're so close. Oh, now you gotta find it.
Okay, you know what I'm gonna do?
You're right.
I'm just gonna. Well, wait. I feel like.
You're so close.
Okay, we're gonna unplug this.
Okay.
Okay, now that we have this in the corner of our screen, problem solving. Like this, and let's. But we also don't want it to be like totally full screen. Wait, this should be fine, right? Oh wait, you can't see anything.
Plugged in.
Yeah, probably. Okay. Wait. Dude. And then. It's like, okay. I feel like we have like an.
Button up in the corner.
Oh, here.
Or drag it.
There, I got it.
There you go. Oh, you couldn't find your mouse.
So let's see if this works over there. Okay. This is amazing.
Yeah, there you go.
And then, okay, so, oh, but,
That's annoying.
Oh, wait.
okay, so almost. So basically what we're gonna do, wait,
If you
escape.
leave it like that, it probably won't take over your screen again.
So we do, wait, we have to like escape it like a little bit, basically?
So like physically drag it to the size of the screen, because it's like trying,
I
you
feel
know
like
how
I'm
like
blind.
when you're watching Netflix
so close.
Hit present now.
Okay, now present,
Yeah, hit present.
and then
Okay,
we're
now.
gonna go like this. Open 19 meter in your window. Okay.
Okay,
Now
then
this
pull that
we're
over
gonna
to your
pull this way, right?
shot. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
So, ooh, can
Oh,
we?
There you go.
Yeah, this looks good, right?
All right, awesome.
Okay, now just making sure, just like a check.
Okay.
So we're. Wait, do you see the? Oh yeah, this is the instructions. Okay.
See the instructions.
Can you say like, okay, so just to make sure that this platform is working, because I've never used this platform before, so like, can you try to go to menti.com and use that code and see if you can vote? That's like the most of the, right? It's like software developers, software management, security. That's fine. Okay, I'm not like gonna be a perfectionist right now.
We're all nerds, it's fine. You fuck with the nerds. All right. Okay.
It was so funny. I was telling him like, you feel like a loser when you're like trying to give a talk and there's like 15 people in the audience, and he's like, dude, we're all losers. This is the Linux conference.
All right, 793.
There was a conference like 20 years ago, it was this kind of Bay Area, San Francisco. Same with it, all right, I'm like, you want to go? Yeah, I'll go. It's like, I was like, yeah, I talked to all my nerdy friends, and they're like, we're not that nerdy.
Yeah, I like, it was funny, I do sound in a music venue, and like last night I showed up, I volunteered there, and then, or I volunteered here, and I went to go do the show, and I was wearing this shirt. I like walk up into the office, and my GM's like, hey, what's up? What the fuck is GCC?
You're like, wait, it's a C compiler.
It's like the nerdiest joke you could possibly imagine, and then it's even nerdier than that, buddy.
Wait, I get what GCC is, but like, what's the joke with the run GCC?
You know, how old are you?
Yeah, well, I don't think you're old enough.
What are you talking about? I'm 30. How old are you?
I'm 23.
Okay, Run DMC ring a bell?
Run DMC was in the 80s.
Okay, Run DMC. Okay, so like Run DMC.
Dude, this is like the wrong audience for me. No, just kidding.
Run DMC is kind of like your OG hip hop. They wrote, no, NWA was fucking police, but like a lot of your
They redid like an Aerosmith song.
Oh yeah, they did Walk This Way by Aerosmith.
That's their big hit. That was like in the mid 80s.
Well, so Dr. Dre was in Run DMC.
Okay.
So like that's where you know Dr. Dre.
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
Like that was when he was still actually gangster. Was when he was in Run DMC.
So I don't know this like super. So it's actually really funny because like one of my slides is talking about like legacy companies and how faster innovation always wins the market. And like I'm talking about like MySpace and Friendster, and I was like giving the presentation to a group, and they're like, do you even know what were you even around by MySpace? Like, do you even have a Friendster account? I'm like, no. I was like, I have to like research this stuff.
I looked up my old MySpace from my freshman year of high school the other day. Edge lord. Like the curated emo song list of here's how angry I am at the world. And like,
Is it? You put your song this way?
Oh yeah, so MySpace was, the other cool thing about MySpace is you could actually make your like HTML background for your website. So like a lot of us like nerdy millennials learned our beginning CSS and HTML editing our MySpace profiles.
So I'm gonna be the only person in this room who has never had a MySpace account, and has never.
Yes.
Whoops.
Well, I mean, Steve, did you have a MySpace? Okay, all right.
Well, talking about HTML, you were also able to hijack a whole bunch of pages by.
There were things you could do. So I listened to Darknet Diaries, which is like a security
Yeah.
podcast, and like there was a vulnerability where a guy realized he could put a block of code in a comment it on somebody's profile, and then it would take over their profile and send that same comment out to every single
Oh my-
connected person, and it
Yeah.
brought down MySpace's network
Oh my god.
just from one, because the one went to 156.
It's
went to-
cross-site scripting, I think, or cross-site reflected.
There was some process.
Yeah.
There was a couple of exploits, but
Shitty
they
front-end
stopped
development.
JavaScript. But it's like, yeah, I can just still call it JavaScript from the HTML.
I think it technically was a replay attack. Like they were just able to.
Yeah, well, but basically, yeah, one of the
you can be a predator.
Yes, you can.
Is
and
that
that's
what your Darknet Diaries went like?
Well, Darknet Diaries is like it's an hour-long podcast of like just
Yeah.
various things, and like that one was just about the guy commenting on everybody's profile and bringing down all of my MySpace.
It's so crazy.
Which is hilarious because it started with one message, and he realized he could do it as a joke, and he just like sent it out to all of his friends.
That
He's
is
like, okay,
actually
cool, and went to
crazy.
bed. Woke up, and it was all over MySpace. Everyone had posted this comment that he'd originally just sent out to his friends.
That
like,
is
ha ha,
crazy.
like, yeah, Anon hacked you, ha ha ha, and everybody got hacked.
Well, the thing about MySpace is like they weren't secure at all and they weren't agile at all, and like fixing a replay attack like that could have taken them like a while.
Well, sometimes.
Wait, is MySpace still like a thing?
I mean, in that it technically exists, and you could, I could log into my.
MySpace.com?
Oh, yeah, it's
like
there.
all your history stuff.
Oh my god, it's now modern.
Rebranded into
I mean,
Hello.
they've been putting lipstick on that pig for years, trying to make it.
Oh my god, look, come here. So even just the basic loading, it's not loading the images. Like, it's a cool UI. What? It's still loading. That means it. Like, where's their search?
So that's the cool thing.
Indexing.
That is the thing I do miss about MySpace. Is like it was like you had your like song playlist that plays when people visited your page, which now is like fucking obnoxious. But like at the time, it was
At the time, it was like cool.
well, yeah, like if I had like a crush on a girl, like put that song I know she knows, like I want you to know I like that music. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
Doesn't Facebook have that, like, I'm listening or I'm watching this now?
yeah, but it doesn't like
funny.
force you to listen.
Listen to it also.
But
Like, no, I want you to have to hear.
I don't want people knowing what I'm watching or listening to.
Yeah.
I have that, yeah, like, I even when
But
I,
it's
like,
so funny because I feel like it was just like so cringy, just the way things worked, like with like guys and crushes. And those days, like somebody was telling me in this conference, like, yeah, so like I want you to take a girl out to prom, so I put like the Backstreet Boys and we made a music video and we gave it to her, and I was just like, that makes me cry and laugh at the same time.
we've
I feel
come
like
a
the
long
dating game has
way.
changed a little bit.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, in the past,
I don't want it that way.
it's honestly better, I would say now. Like, I mean, it's, you
In a way, it's cuter. It's like,
well, the commoditization via like Tinder of dating sucks a lot, but like there are a lot of things that even 15, 20 years ago were just like seen as okay that are like not okay now, and like I
Yeah.
would rather live now.
but there's so many things that are okay probably now that were not okay.
Well, I mean, I'm more thinking they're okay now and they won't be okay in 20 years.
I just want to stop and like interrupt, just say like, this talk is for you. It's all about build kite.
Thank you, appreciate that. $20 would be the
I
minimum.
meant.
Oh,
But did
okay,
you,
all right.
here's, no,
I see.
here's your recruitment. This is it. Come on, is that it?
What time did you think?
1:30.
30? All right. I told them to be here for 30.
Well, we were joking about it because like they're from Bilka, and I'm like, oh, like I'm mentioning Bilka in my talk. They're like, yeah, the whole talk is gonna be about us. We're gonna video this and like post this on Bilka for promotional content.
Man, you are pushing hard for this, man.
Well, I
like
want-
respect. You are making sure your talk is attended.
I mean, right now there's 4, so like
Hey, it's attended.
it's being attended.
I passed a few rooms, they don't have any.
Eh,
I'm just saying.
Dude, I have 15 minutes to recruit.
Yeah.
that looking drive is terrifying.
You know, a big tub of beer usually gets a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, literally.
Oh, you guys didn't?
Ooh, guys, can we offer free
Yours
beer?
was?
Can we offer free beer?
I mean, you can.
I know a couple of guys that used to do that.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I mean, that's no
I
security.
don't know if it was like, they were like, yeah, I'm just gonna treat people, but
I mean,
it attracted a few extra people.
I'm
more of a discount mule guy myself.
I think
Where
I'm
you fight for the worm at the end.
I mean, that's exactly how like security meetups works. It's like they feed you and then you like sit like, it's like, when you give like kids like snacks to like, to play nicely. It's how security meetups work. Like, wired as humans. Okay, when I'm
We go for colorful socks.
colorful.
Yeah, dude. Oh my god. So I was wearing these last night, and my fiance was like, "Which one is this?"
Oh Oh, those are bad.
She was so happy. She was like, "You need to give me some socks," and so I came back and I got.
I mean, there's probably some terrible, ugly socks.
I got her all the ugly socks. I also got all my coworkers' kids Lego sets.
Oh wait, do they still have Lego sets there?
Yeah, the foundation, computing foundation.
Closing at 2 o'clock, so.
Oh come on, I
I grabbed like way
we
too
need to
many.
grab some Lego
If you want,
sets.
I'll give you one.
Take a quick break. And we'll get Lego sets.
Okay, guys.
You have 10 minutes. I'll just start it for you. It's
Okay.
fine. I saw your
Okay.
slides.
Where do I where do I hold the microphone to not be annoying?
Right there's good.
Okay, like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't grip around the bowl.
I feel like I'm gonna annoy everyone.
That's good.
You just put it right against your larynx right there. And just
Okay. Okay.
I had a guitar player last night who was like grabbing the head of the microphone just to piss me off, so it would feedback just a little bit. I've known him for like 8 years, so he's just fucking.
Ooh. Also, you guys, I'm like, this is part of like the recruitment. Like, okay, I'm sending texts afterwards in the mail because like I don't like sitting in 1 hour talk, so I assume. But also, like, can you guys ask questions? It's just like for the rest of the fake audience that I'm recruiting, because like I'm not paying them to ask questions. I'm only paying you guys to ask questions.
I wish we could like bottle it. We'd solve our energy crisis.
Yeah, I'm just gonna actually.
Like obsolescence. People are flooding in
Okay. I'm gonna also go run. Also, yeah. Legos, water. Take a photo. Thank you so much.
Here, let's get the network cable out of the way so you look all professional.
Just like pretend to look professional. That
Yeah,
kind of thing.
look at like,
You.
point at someone, yeah. wait, do that. You gotta get serious, come on.
Okay. Okay.
Just
Okay.
stand in front
Okay.
of the podium and be like, yep, look at him.
Okay. Do I like stand just in front of the podium?
Oh, yeah. Point at something.
Were we moving fast or slow? Just let me be clear on this.
This is the medium portion. Still using.
We're practicing. We're practicing for questions.
Okay, fine, beautiful.
Okay.
Wait. All right, take one. Actually, we'll take the serious one. All right, you're all happy, smiling, wonderful, lovely.
Yeah, I'm just killing this
You gotta
conference.
work on it. Have you seen that like meme video of it's like a Chinese model who's just like like every shot she does another pose.
Ooh, yeah.
She's like,
I mean, I'm just all that energy in that talk and all that energy about Linux, guys. Dude. Okay, I'm gonna go get a cup of water before I talk and do some last recruitments.
yeah.
What? Yeah, definitely. Good idea. You over there. Good idea. Okay, bye. I'll see you guys.
Actually, just ask me to look up the
Did you figure out what company is it?
I'm guessing it's not.
I don't know.
What is it?
Oh, no, that's the platform she's using to present.
Oh, that's
Wait, did we all just get pulled in?
Oh,
Festival security? What kind of festival?
Here's a little place called Coachella.
Oh, it was like, are you doing like,
It's a small hometown, Coachella, like, based, festival. Three or four people show up. Yeah, a couple. We got a few songs, some beer. Yeah, I think there's like 5 musicians. Maybe 6. I think 3 Dog Night's playing this year. Yeah, it's the world. Jeremiah was the Pope. Shambhala, man. No, that's the next week at Stagecoach, right? Oh. That's what they put on Jeremiah. Dude, I would actually, unironically, take a 3 Dog Night. I would too. I don't know if that's still alive. Well, because like working at a 70s bar, I hear them all the time. Oh yeah. It's pretty weird. I grew up without music. It's like honestly, I live in this weird like space because all the music I listen to is the 70s, early 80s music. Yeah, that's awesome. It's yeah, like I don't want to change. It's nice. I listen to K-rock, the 80s. But they have 80s too. Yeah. Primarily. Oh, every night, yeah. This is the best part. So, the house band is a bunch of like washed out people.
there she is.
And like the lead singer, I remember
I was like, where is she, dude?
I just freaked out and I decided not to come for that.
Well, I did recruit one person successful.
Okay, who's your recruiter?
Axel.
I know, well, maybe 7.
Hi. Thanks for coming. Just check us in the mail.
Okay, don't start without me. I'm gonna go run to the restroom, okay?
Okay. Maybe.
45 minutes later.
Yeah, so we're just waiting on somebody in the restroom. Our friends are on the band, so like I get to stay with for years this year. Sure. I made on my website how to build a GS. I get like 100 hits a day. You're the reason there are all those yurts out there. No, I have GS accounts. Called 3/4 inch. What's it called? It's the stuff they use to put wiring through. It's conduit. It's conduit, part conduit. So you have your phone right now? Go to weasel.com/dome.html. Just regular weasel? Yeah, that's my plan. It's EMT. That's what the conduit. I don't know. Metal conduit, right? /dome.html. Yeah. Oh, this is spider. Do you have a water, like a grade water strategy? I've been trying to think of something with the acronym strategy. So the thing is that I would take like a 1 liter shower. And I get a bucket and I just get a towel and there's nothing very small. But so you see the picture? Yeah. That's a 12-foot dome, and there's 5 guys standing on top of it, sitting on top of it. But you can scroll down, there's the 16-foot dome, it's the first one I built, and then the 24-foot dome is the second one I built. It's a pretty good size. But I can fit it in the back of a pickup truck, and I can go and assemble it with a ladder myself. It's a big, including 24-foot, including the rest of it. What's the website? Thanks. Thank you so much.
Right, I wasn't going to, are you hosting a cold like
What is it called? Jesus.com?
So
Weasel.com/dome.html.
if you want to build a geodesic dome yourself,
Okay.
it's got some good guides and good pictures.
Oh, that's awesome. Dude. That's pretty awesome. It's pretty cool. Yeah, I'll let you know when I build mine.
Right after you send me that check.
Yeah. Dude, but come on, like you could have gotten more, if you know what I mean. Okay, what time is it? It is, I think it's time, presenting time. Okay. Hi, guys. Okay, it's still working. Just in case, like, the people in the back can't hear me. No, just kidding. Hi, my name is Esty, and today the topic of the talk is Move Fast, Be Safe. What if I told you you could write code fast without causing security vulnerabilities? No one's available, actually. Just super interested in the topic. So I'm from Boulder, Colorado, and fun fact about me, I like to travel a lot. I'm a digital nomad, so this year I've been living and traveling in over 9 countries and 4 continents. I work at Invoca. I'm a security engineer at Invoca, and what I do is help provide tools for security tools for development teams to write better code faster. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So, giving engineers feedback about the security vulnerabilities in their code as they write them is a really important but oftentimes ignored part of the development process. So today we're going to talk about the development process, the DevOps culture, the project that I created in order to help give that feedback loops to the engineers, and we're going to finish it off with Q&A. We don't want to be those engineers who test code in production, and we don't want our security teams and our engineering teams to be those engineers who test their code in production, especially the security part of it. So I am going to ask you guys a favor to take out your phones and go to menti.com and enter that code. And, you know, I myself have a little bit of ADHD, and I have a really hard time concentrating for a long, extended period of time. So I hope that we'll be able to collaborate together, even though, see who's around you in this room. So the first question is, what's your current role? Are you a software developer, software management, security related, any other field? Looks like we've got some software developers and 1 security related. 2? So, and from a raise of hands, how many software? Just 2 software developers? And then management? No management? Just geeks? Okay. Okay, that's pretty, I'll give you a medal for that. So, this is how the software development lifecycle works. Trying to create a new feature, we're gonna write code, we're gonna write some tests, run that code, commit that code, push that code to CI, code review, QA, and deployment. One study at IBM found that it costs 6 times more to fix a vulnerability found during implementation than during the design stage. And it costs 15 times more to fix that same bug during QA than fixing it during the design period. The point is, as we go further along the software development process, the cost to fix vulnerabilities raises. And this is because if you find a bug in QA, you have to go back and restart the development process. You have to go back and write some more code, run those tests, commit that code, push to CI, and code review, QA. So when I started off at Invoca, I was a very junior developer, and sometimes during code review, a more senior developer would find a line of code that was vulnerable. And it could be 1 line that I have to change. And it could be even that more senior developer told me exactly how to change that line of code. But that change might have taken 2 weeks or 3 weeks to implement and to merge to mainline. Because again, I had to rewrite that code, rewrite those tests, rerun those tests, and finish the rest of the software development lifecycle process. Now, after deployment, the cost to fix those defects raises to the roof. At this point, we're affecting live customers. So let's do security here. Let's shift left and do security all the way as much as possible on the left. Now, let's talk a little bit about how this played out for us at Invoca. For 10 months of the year, we were writing code. We were a very agile company, and we were just pushing out features constantly. But then security audits came along. And when the security auditors came, they ran scans against production, and they found a whole host of vulnerabilities. Now, we're a conversational intelligence platform. Our clients include companies like AT&T, banks like Bank of America, hospitals. We are under a lot of compliance regulations. And if we don't pass our PCI, HIPAA, GDPR compliance standards, then we're messed up as a company. And what would happen is the security team would go over to the engineers and tell them, here are some important fixes that you have to do in order for our company to stay compliant. But this would push off all this plan work that we had in store. And it was really costly for the company. Now, just a quick question, if you guys can go to the link and use the code again. When does your team generally fix vulnerabilities? Are you guys finding out about these vulnerabilities at audit time? Are you guys finding out about these vulnerabilities after being hacked? Are you guys finding out about these vulnerabilities through bug bounty or security code reviews? Obviously, the worst way to find out about vulnerabilities is after being hacked. It seems like we have some really proactive teams here that are more doing security code reviews. It's a little bit some less proactive audit time. And a few people or nobody that's brave enough to admit that they've gotten hacked before. It's okay. Yeah, yeah. Right. It's okay. You know, what happens in this room stays in this room. Safe space, exactly. So, you know, this was a sample developer story. As a developer, I'm creating a new service. I'm going to write some code. I'm going to run some tests, push that code to CI, open a PR against mainline branch, peer reviews and approves the PR, and I finally merge the code. But then when give or take 5, 6, 7, 8 months, and the security auditors come around and they run those scans against production, and I'm back repeating those steps 1 through 5. That sucks. So in some companies, they have code reviews. Now, the problem is in a company with 150 engineers like we have in our company, and a security team of 6, out of the security team of 6, there's only 2 that are focused on AppSec development. Either, if we were doing manual code reviews, either the developers would look like this, or I would look like this, or both, probably both. It's really, really hard to effectively do security reviews without impacting the agile development process. How long does it take for your security team to review code? If in your companies you guys have code reviews, does it take minutes, hours, days, or is it non-existent? I know at the first company that we worked, at the first startup that I worked, security, we just didn't know it was a thing. And so it was like the fingers crossed anthem. We would just push code and pray. Push code and pray. Okay. And when I say days, I mean, are we talking about weeks or weeks? Okay. Weeks? Okay. Anybody, any last? Okay. So let me talk a little bit about my security trajectory and why this was an important problem for me to solve. I am from a Hasidic background, ultra-Orthodox Jewish background, and I first got into tech when I was in 12th grade. Our school didn't have the resources for an advanced math class, and my friend and I were able to choose a topic and self-study it. Now, computer science seemed much more interesting than self-studying calculus, so I chose the easier option. And surprise, I liked it. At the end of the year, I was trying to figure out what to do for the summer, and one of my friends mentioned that her friend was getting a software internship. I didn't really know about internships or software internships, and I didn't really know that as a 12th grader you can't get a software internship. Didn't really come from that world where I had that lexicon. So I did some Google searching, and I found this program, this Google CSSI program for kids from diverse backgrounds, a 4-week crash course at the Google headquarters, learning more about computer science. And I knew it was a really competitive program, so I thought, I'm going to apply, but I'm for sure not going to get accepted. And surprise, I did get accepted, and I did spend that month after 12th grade at Google. And that was my first indication that this is something that I could do, and this is something that I might want to do in the future. Security was always super, super interesting. And after working in a small startup and making really shitty apps, if I may say so myself, there was only a team of like 3 on the security team. I decided to look into the CISSP. And I decided that I was going to self-study the CISSP. And if I passed the CISSP, then I would have enough information about security to know if I wanted to be a security engineer or not. Just, I think, a little bit of a backward way of thinking, but it worked. And, you know, having that background as a CISSP helps me understand how important compliance. As I mentioned before, compliance is super integral to our company. Our clients include hospitals, banks, insurance companies, and if we're not up to compliance standards, they're leaving, and they're going with our competitors. Now, after I passed the ISSP, I decided to go to a Flatiron bootcamp. Again, a little bit backward, but it worked. Unfortunately, the other 2 women in my class dropped out, and I know that I may have the soul of a nerdy 40-year-old male, but I certainly don't look like that. And it just left me the youngest and the only female in a group of middle-aged white males, which, again, it's my soul type, so it works. For the past few months, I've been studying for the OSCP. And I originally scheduled my OSCP like for right before the talk, but I pushed it off. So I hope, I hope that when I take the OSCP, I will pass. And being a hacker, I know how important it is to write secure code. Just one dependency or one misconfiguration can be a way in for attackers. So fixing these vulnerabilities were really important to me. And I was the youngest engineer in Avoca, and I had a lot of imposter syndrome. And part of my job was now running after these developers who had 15 years of experience and asking them to kindly fix their code. I didn't want to be an asshole. And another problem, I'm kind of lazy. I felt like this was like an inefficient problem that was so bad for me in so many ways, and I felt there must be an easier way to do all this. So before we get on to how we solve this, I first want to talk about the core principles that we have on our engineering team, which led us to solve the problem in the way that we did. At Invoca, we buy into the benefits of a DevOps culture. What we believe is that a loosely coupled, highly cohesive, and autonomous teams bring on faster innovation. So let's talk about loosely coupled. Each team is not dependent on other teams in order to do their job. Highly cohesive. Each team has a very specific and defined service that they're working on. Autonomous. Each team has the expertise and the knowledge to finish and drive their personal service to completion. And all of those three things drive faster innovation. Now, let me give you a real life example to explain this better. My little sisters, I have a little sister that's 10 years old and a little sister that's 12 years old. They both woke up one day and they decided to make a coffee stand. They were going to sell coffee and cake, but they looked in our refrigerator and they realized that they didn't have the ingredients to make their cake that they wanted to sell with their coffee. Now, so they first had to go to my mom and ask my mom for permission to take them to the store and to buy the necessary ingredients. They come back with the ingredients, and now it's time to bake the cake or the cookies that they wanted to bake. But they had to ask my dad. They had to ask my dad permission to turn on the oven. Now, my dad was busy, and it took him a few hours to turn on the oven and watch them make sure that, like they didn't burn the house down or something like that. And then after that, it was time to sell their cookies. So my parents allowed them to sell their cookies and their coffee right outside the front door of our house. But we have a very, very quiet block, and not a lot of people were passing through. So they didn't really have a good market. So they called me, their older sister, and they asked, hey, do you mind coming and watching us, taking us to the park where there's a better market so we can advance our prospects and we can make money? They worked, they were working their whole day on getting this $10 from their stand. And me, I'm a nice sister 60% of the time, but I also have a job. And it's kind of hard to justify skipping all my meetings to watch my little sisters do their coffee stand. So I wasn't really feeling it that day, and I told them no. Now, just to give myself a little bit of credit, I did buy their bottles of water, which I feel like I do get some awards there. But, I was thinking about it a little bit, and I said, what if they were autonomous? What if they were loosely coupled? What if they didn't have to ask permission from my parents? What if they didn't have to ask me to watch them in the park? How much more money would they have made? How much faster would they be able to pivot and to innovate and make more money? And, all ends well, they made $30, which is pretty impressive. But the idea is that this is the DevOps culture in just a story. Let's take a little bit of a closer look at other case studies. So studies show that teams that use agile, lean DevOps culture are much more likely to win out the competition. Here's a few examples of different companies that are disrupting markets. So who here has tried to buy a car in the past 2 years? Okay, well, selling a car, you'd be on the other end. You'd be on the benefit end of the stick. Whoever has not tried to buy a car in the past 2 years probably has friends who have been complaining to them about the bother and the pain of buying a car and overpaying for a car that just a mere few months ago was $5,000 less. And I'm sorry for all the pain in this room. So GM and Ford closed their factories one after another, sometimes for months on end, because they didn't have the right computer chips. And this left the dealer lots bare, and it sent the price of the car is zooming up, right? Now Tesla, on the other hand, Tesla also faced the same shortage that all of the other companies faced. But they were able to take the existing computer chips and rewrite their existing software to fit those computer chips. And at the end of it, Tesla sold nearly twice as many vehicles as it did in 2020. It was totally unhindered by this computer chip shortage. They were able to quickly innovate and win the market. Netflix, okay? I'm giving some of these examples, and I know that you guys can relate to these examples more than I can myself, right? So what do you guys think of when you think of Google? When you think of searching, what company do you guys Google? When you guys think of sticky notes, what company do you guys think of? VM? Yeah, exactly. Okay, good. When you think of binge watching? Netflix. Dude, seriously. So interesting thing about Netflix and Disney was when Netflix first started. They were disrupting Blockbuster kiosk movie rentals, and they decided to do mail, right, rentals. And again, I feel like this crowd has lived this, so feel free to interrupt, right? Now, fast forward to Netflix putting Blockbuster out of the market, and they said, we don't want somebody to do the same thing that we did to Blockbuster. We need to think, where's the next innovation going to come from? And they thought, okay, in 5 years, or the next innovation in the market is going to come on through online streaming. And they essentially created internal competition. They created their mail service, right, their mail movie service, alongside with an online streaming service, and kind of pitted those two companies together as competition. And yeah, they won the market. Facebook crushed MySpace. And I'm just curious, who here has had a MySpace account? Okay. Exactly, MySpace, right. So who had a Friendster? Wow, this crowd is so millennial. Yeah. So here's a quote by Sean Percival of MySpace. This site was such a massive spaghetti ball mess. You could do those tree flowcharts of your website, and we did it, and it was like the frickin' 7 scrolls that you could see. It just went on forever and ever and ever. It was clearly not nimble or agile in any way. The last example is our company. Our company is now currently worth over $1 billion, and we dethroned the previous competition, Marchex, who was failing to deliver. And this is why continuous improvement is such a strong value to us. It has enabled others to win in the market, and it has enabled us to win in the market. And we believe that's the key to our future success. In order for an agile environment, in order to have autonomous teams, in order to have faster innovation, we have to shift left. Shift left does not mean that we can't afford a DevOps person, though it sometimes means that, right? We have to embed the knowledge with the people doing the work, the goal being that we're driving up the ability for somebody to take a risk that's too large unknowingly. So the idea is the people closest to the work have the context and the knowledge to make the best decision possible. And the important point here is that it's done through safety and automation. Right? So if my company told me, Estate, I want you to find a SIM now. I'm giving you $2 million to find a possible solution. And, you know, we want to make you totally autonomous, so we're not going to do any checks. You just tell us the name of the company and we're going to go with it. There's going to be one of two things that happen. Either I may make a mistake, choose the wrong company, waste $2 million. Another possible problem is it could take me 10 months to make that decision, because if I'm spending $2 million of my company's money, I do not want to make the wrong decision. In order for us to shift left, we need to have safety. Now, the thing, as you all know, is shift left can become lip service to security. There's a saying, shift left becomes shit left if nobody if nobody cares, right? There's a little bit more of an explicit version of this. You can't increase speed or autonomy without safety. And it's not just about speeding down the highway at 100 miles an hour. It's about speeding down that highway and wearing a seatbelt. There's two types of safety. The first type of safety is safety that the failures are low impact and they're easy to detect. I don't want to be wasting $3 million of the company's money and finding out about it 3 years later. The second kind of safety is psychological safety, safety that people won't be blamed or reprimanded for making the decisions that they're making. So now that we have those principles in mind, what if I told you we can write code fast without causing security vulnerabilities? Okay, so let's take a moment and go back to the beginning where we talked about how we fix security defects through manual audits by audit time. So step 2 was automated CVE audits using Brakeman, CVE audit, and BuildKite. Just a shout out to the BuildKite guys over there. So these are a bunch of buzzwords that are very specific to the technology that we use. But let me just explain the basic points. So BuildKite is a partially hosted CI automation system that lets you build and manage multiple pipelines for your projects. If you have any questions about BuildKite, feel free to go up to the guys in the BuildKite shirts. Bundle audit is a CVE dependency checker. What it really essentially does is checks the dependencies in your application and checks a database with all vulnerabilities and a database which says exactly which packages are vulnerable. And then it lets you know if you're using a vulnerable version of a gem or not. Brakeman. Brakeman is a static analysis security tool. It basically scans the code at any time of development, and it can find vulnerabilities early on because it doesn't require the entire application stack. So we added these two steps, Brakeman and bundler audit, to our pipeline so that whenever anybody pushed code to GitHub, Brakeman and bundle audit would be run. So essentially, we were just automating security scans. Now, for those of you who are in security, part of the security team, there's a little bit of an issue when it comes to resolving legacy vulnerabilities and putting a system like this in place. What happens is, so imagine our main repository. We've been coding for 8 years, and we don't run Brakeman on a regular cadence. So when we run Brakeman, this security tool, the first time, we have over 200 critical vulnerabilities. And if you give that to a developer and you say, dude, you have 200 critical vulnerabilities in your code, that's a lot of noise that people don't want to deal with. So for a lot of teams, just resolving those legacy vulnerabilities is a big stop for creating a system like this, for having a system that automates and scanning of your vulnerabilities. So there's a few things that helped us and enabled us to implement a CVE audit and Brakeman with all this legacy noise. The first thing was legacy vulnerabilities comparison. So instead of doing annotation that's told the developers, you have 500 vulnerabilities in your code, it said there's two annotations. There's one annotation that said you have 3 new vulnerabilities in your code. Here's how to fix those vulnerabilities. And you have 200 legacy vulnerabilities. And the legacy vulnerabilities was not the developer's problem to solve. It was a company problem. The second thing that we did was a Brakeman open source contribution. So when our developers were first writing Brakeman, was first developing our application 7, 8 years ago on Ruby on Rails, there was no custom sanitization. Custom sanitization was not a built-in part of Ruby. Now it is. And what Brakeman was doing was Brakeman was picking up on these SQL injection vulnerabilities, and they said, you're not sanitizing your functions, your SQL queries properly. So we had this great open source tool, Brakeman, and I'm a huge fan of open source. It's the incubator of open innovation. It allows individual contributors to work together and to build something that much greater. And Brakeman specifically is a work of art, but I hit this blockage when I had 150 SQL, critical SQL warnings that really were warnings of a special custom sanitization function that we wrote ourselves, and it really was safe. So I overcame this figurative wall by giving back to the Brakeman project and adding a new feature that allowed you to specify which SQL queries are safe. And then the last thing was a lot of, after we whittled down the noise through those 2 points, the last thing that we did was service owning teams were responsible for investigating their vulnerabilities. So there's a lot of like, Dear John, just wondering if you have had a chance to please look at those vulnerabilities that I sent you 5 months ago, and if you have any context on when you're going to be fixing them. And funny enough, I didn't even realize how many people I bothered until company conference. And there it was. It was my first time meeting everyone. And I don't work with most, I work in security, right? And I'm not working, these engineers are not on my team. But I keep on getting these, hey Esty, how are you? Hey Esty, and I'm like, do I know you? And then I realized, oh, I've been bothering these people for the past couple of months. Oh, so for anybody here that is software engineers who, or any of the people here who are the botherers, who are security engineers, who are hunting down the developers and asking them and begging them to please fix these security vulnerabilities, we appreciate your service. Now, here's a very important point. We added this build kite pipeline for our most critical and widely used project and repository. But the question is, how do we build security by default into our services, right? We are a company with over 600 repositories. And we checked one repository off. Yes, it was the most critical repository, it was our master repository, but we have these 600 repositories that are floating around. And if we wanted to do the same thing that we did with our critical repository, that means that we'd have to copy and paste, and those steps, we'd have to duplicate those steps into every single pipeline in GitHub, which is 600 pipelines. Again, I'm lazy. I don't like doing that kind of work. We wanted to build security into our services by default. And we wanted to keep up with the fast pace of innovation. So when I say innovation, I mean internal and external innovation. If part of the organization decides tomorrow that we want to use a new coding language, we as a security team need to support that organization's direction. We need a scalable solution that will support any decision that the organization decides to make. And the solution was Security Scanner as a service that automates all things. Now, the name is a bad name. Security Scanner as a service. It's a bad name because it's very hard to read and it's very confusing. What is SAS? Is it SAS? Is it SAS? Did somebody put an extra S in the letter? But the problem is, I don't get paid to make creative names. I get paid to code. And that's why we have a shitty, shitty name. And if anybody has an idea and a better name, please come up. Please come up and tell me what it is. Because any name by this point will be better than Security Scanner as a Service. Anything. Exactly. So we created this project to give tighter feedback loops to developers as they are writing their code. It identifies what coding languages are used, and then based off of that, it will run the correct checks and outputs the results to developers in the GitHub portal. I've seen a lot of other solutions for security scanning, and I personally like the solution that we've created. One, because I created it and I'm a little bit biased, but another reason is because this solution has the results right there for the developer. A lot of solutions that I've seen takes the security scans and takes the results of that and puts it in a new portal for the security team to make them look like they have a job. I think that's the purpose of it. Is like the security team needs like their own special portal, and then they can like look at their vulnerabilities, and then they can like hunt down all the developers and say like, this is your fault, and like fix this because we're gonna get hacked. But over here, it's giving instantaneous feedback to the developer themselves. So now they can see the vulnerability as soon as they push any code and write any code and have that feedback immediately. Now, if you see the green checks, Security Scanner as a Service check has to be green before it's merged to mainline. We have that restriction in our company. So developers must either remediate, snooze, or ignore the vulnerability before they push their code. And it makes a developer more interested in security, because right now, they're banking on the fact that this check is green before they can actually push. This is the high-level architecture. So developer writes some code, pushes that code to GitHub. GitHub checks we just created, and a webhook is sent to the Ruby web server. The remote repo is cloned. The coding languages are identified. The checks are created. Security scans are run on the repos. And finally, the results are outputted to GitHub portal. So yeah, we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're switching actually to Kafka. Okay, so our tech stack looks a little bit like this. We use GitHub checks, the OctoKit library, to create the initial webhook and display the results. A Ruby web server to receive the GitHub check webhooks. Our background server is currently delayed jobs, but we're moving to Kafka. We're using Kubernetes to deploy the application, and horizontal pod auto-scaling to keep the costs down by having an elastic delayed job processor. So before we talked about this developer story that was really inefficient because the teams had all these vulnerability fixes pushed onto the roadmaps, and they had this urgent interrupt work which caused this thrash and displacement of previously planned work. And now let's talk about the new developer story. So as a developer, I'm creating a new service. I'm writing the code. I'm pushing the code to CI. Security Scanner as a Service, or any other name that you may help me and graciously think of, is identifying the coding language and running applicable security scans. Are there any vulnerabilities? If there are, fix them now. The PR is blocked until those vulnerabilities are fixed. Then open a PR against mainline branch, and the peer reviews and approves the PR. And congratulations, you can merge it now. We've created these tighter feedback loops for developers to find security vulnerabilities earlier on. Let's talk a little bit about the results of this project. Now, security team is not a blocker to development. Yes, security is technically a blocker because you have to wait for the check to become green, but the security team is not a blocker to development. The security team is not running after the engineering team, throwing urgent fixes on the roadmap. There are tighter feedback loops, and engineers are participating now more in security, and they're able to identify the different security vulnerabilities in their code. And because of that, there's barely any findings in our audit pen testing, because what the auditors and the pen testers are essentially doing, the pen testers are also a little bit lazy sometimes. They basically end up just running scans against production. And what we've been doing this whole time is running scans against every single build. You know, the best part of this for me is that it's automated part of my job away, and it's allowed me to visit and see the roles a little bit more. You know, I used to run after developers and politely ask and beg and threaten them, please fix those damn vulnerabilities. And now they see the vulnerabilities right away, and if they need more context, they ask me about how to fix the vulnerabilities. But we've turned the tables, right? It's not me running after them anymore. It's them running after me and asking me for context, essentially. So here's what's to come. We're working on support for more coding languages, specifically Golang, Python, and Docker image scanning. We are working on continuous monitoring, so if there's ever a drop, we will get it will like auto heal, and the Kubernetes auto healing, self-healing. We are upgrading the project from a bootstrapped like MVC to production ready service, which takes more time than any of the features that are actually created. And then here's a little bit of a shameless plug for open source, right? We're at an open source conference, and open source is so important because that's how we build this culture of continuous improvement, innovation, and reiteration. And that's how really we foster originality. So on our roadmap is to make security scanner as a service open source, but it's going to be prioritized based on feedback if this is something that others want to see open sourced. The last thing that we're working on is dynamic security suggestions in the code editor. So the first step is this automated, these manual audits and this annoying security team that's giving this security fixes, right? The second stage of it is automating those security audits. Every time you push to GitHub, you get that feedback. But even better, what if when the developer was writing the code, they're writing the dependency and including package SQL 1.05, and all of a sudden, right there, they get that alert and pop up from the editor. SQL 1.05 is vulnerable. Use SQL package 1.06. How much easier would it make our lives? How much easier would it make the lives of the security teams and the developers, and have us cultivate a more harmonious relationship? And that's, again, something that we're working on. So, you know, we're almost over, and I am curious to see the feedback from this audience. Is this something that people like to see open source? And if it was open source, can you see your company using it? Is it helpful? Is this something that people like to see as a hosted solution? Is this something that people like to see the dynamic security suggestions feature? Is this something that people see as something helpful? Just something curious for me. This is kind of interesting to watch, like with the SCaLE, it's just kind of interesting to watch the numbers like go up and down, like just the way that the numbers work out together. Give it one more second for anyone who wants to just like skew the numbers in the wrong direction or something like that. Okay, and I think we have, yeah, I think that gave us just enough time for Q&A. No, unfortunately, we're not SNCC, right? And we're not better than SNCC, because I feel like SNCC is like the best in the market. There are a few things that we do in our company to bring that level down, which is like there's a lot of false positives that are like very specific to the code, to like the application. So again, for us, like we had a lot of different like ignore functions of sanitization functions or patterns that were really okay, and we were able to ignore that with all this like added configuration. That's one way that we're dealing with all the false positives. And then, you know, there's always going to be false positives. There's always going to be false positives, but then there's certain patterns that are just more secure in general. So yeah, like if a developer is writing code at that moment, I would prefer them to use the more secure pattern, even if using the less secure pattern is not going to actually be a security vulnerability. Do you know what I mean? Like if it's not fixing it, but it's just like in the moment, I'd rather them use the more secure pattern.
Sort of adding to what you were saying, which is like there's one aspect, which is the technical aspect, how it works. There's the cultural aspect. If all developers have more issues with security, they're thinking about it rather than it being something that is happens after the fact and it comes back and that's actually they're thinking about it on a regular basis. That is a huge win, even if technically the solution is not perfect. I would argue the main value of that is there. It's like the whole thing with open source, like the value of the code is not really the value, it's the people building it. So if you want to say code.
Yeah, and that's exactly like one of the things that I've really found out about as a result of this project is, you know, people. So what I was getting asked to do is to give lightning talks on different security topics, versus beforehand, nobody really cared about security. Nobody knew what the security team was there for. They assumed we have a security team because we need one, but nobody really knew about security. And like nowadays, again, I'm getting requests, SD, can you give us a lightning talk to tell us how bundler audit works and how to fix a vulnerability if you find one? Can you give us a lightning talk about how SQL injections work and why it's so bad? And it's just, again, the culture aspect of of inspiring the developers to really think about security a little bit deeper. Thanks.
So on the developer side, so you're saying you kind of automated your job a little bit by having the security scans in the pipeline. I'm trying to now, developers are overwhelmed with like fixing those 3,000 and 300 or whatever vulnerabilities. We're trying to do something with RenovateBot, which is similar to DefenderBot, I guess. It kind of automatically creates PRs, updating versions of your packages for you. Do you know much about that pattern? Is that a successful strategy? Is anyone else using something like that? It seems like that's creating some more churn.
Yeah, so firstly, like when we started off with this, a lot of it was like about prioritization. So we're not going to focus on the lower vulnerabilities. We're not going to focus on the medium vulnerabilities. We're not even alerting the developers on the lower, the medium vulnerabilities. Yeah.
But even that is still
And it's still a lot. But the problem sometimes with just doing automated like DependABot fix button. In fact, I was thinking about using that pattern for the security scanner as a service application, where like you just press fix this and it will like automatically create a PR for that. The only problem is that a lot of times those changing one package can like literally break the entire application, and we want to kind of err more on the side of caution. So like the talk that I talked with, when we were first rolling this out and we had all this legacy vulnerabilities, the way that I kind of pitched this to the managers and, like the VP of development is like, we really want to start off from like we really want this to be in our culture, that we're like clean and that we're solving our vulnerabilities earlier on instead of by audit time. And yeah, this is going to maybe, clearing this mess might take a month of development time, but it's important. It's tech debt, but critical tech debt. And that seemed to work in our case.
One other real quick follow-up to that, which is, so we do security scans and it says this application is vulnerable at this time, and the developers fix it, and it's not vulnerable. A month later, new CVEs come out, new vulnerabilities are found. Do you recommend, or do you think it's a good pattern to continually, like maybe on a weekly or maybe monthly basis, rerun the pipelines and essentially rerun the security scanner as a service thing on the existing code to catch new vulnerabilities that are coming out, even though the code hasn't changed?
So currently what happens is on every single build, it will run the scans on the entire application. So what happens sometimes is exactly that. So on top of pre-existing code, and actually was like a little bit of a culture issue for us, and it was something that we taught developers. So what would happen is a new, let's say SQL, a package of SQL that we were originally using started to become insecure, and it was a critical, critical vulnerability. Now the thing is that what happens when one person pushes insecure code into the pipeline, what will happen is it's going to break it for everyone else, right? Because essentially we're running, again, the security scans on the entire application stack. So if somebody is at fault, the entire company is going to suffer for it, right? Now, what we do is we have the 2 scans. So one scan, Brakeman, that's the scan that we do like forced, it has to be green in order to go. But bundler audit, which is dependencies, and dependencies are a lot more fluid, we let developers push vulnerability code with bundler audit vulnerabilities because it's so fluid, and we have a really easy way of snoozing it, and you can only snooze it for 1 month. But we're trying to create this culture that it's like if you see something, say something. So the first person who sees the vulnerability is tasked with trying to solve it and upgrade the dependency. Now, if it's a dependency that's too big for that person on their own, then they can find either the service owning team or they go to the security team, and the security team hands the new vulnerability out to whoever they think should be fixing it. So again, it's a lot of it is like cultural. Like we want that culture where people see a vulnerability and they do something about it and they're proactive about it. And in order to have that kind of culture, there's a lot of training that goes into that.
It's always no Kukiri.
What is it?
It's always no Kukiri that shows up.
Say it again.
Never mind. Do you know what no Kukiri is? The gem? It's that XML parser that comes in.
Yes.
With that gem every other month.
And it's a problem when you have like an application that's like the core application is running on that gem. And you know what? Sometimes a lot of it, as a security team, we're running after developers and we want them to fix vulnerabilities. But a big part about it is giving the context to the developers to know when it's the right choice to fix the vulnerability and when it's not the right choice to fix the vulnerability. Because, you know, sometimes it's not the best business choice to fix the vulnerability. Sometimes it's the best business choice to build another newer, fancier feature that's going to make the company a lot of money and fix the vulnerability later on. And a lot of that is like having the developers understand how critical and how severe the vulnerability is and what that means, what the vulnerability means, and that will help them make a better decision, a more informed decision. Yeah.
So it sounds like because you're automating away a portion of your job, there's still going to come a time when you're going to be looking back and trying to review it. Is there anything in the pipeline, at least just for the app itself, to kind of keep track of what things have been reported, ignored, all the actions taken?
Yeah, actually, so there's something in our pipeline that we're trying to do. We're going to call it, I think, like iBugs, where, so at our stand-ups, at like our engineering stand-ups, we have like 1 day a month where we go over all like the alerts and we're like, okay, this team had 500 alerts and this is the amount of alerts that they resolved. And we want to have a security, like an iBugs alert, where it's like, okay, this month we took care of 50 vulnerabilities. We had 25 new vulnerabilities, and like we ignored 100 new vulnerabilities, and we want the entire C-suite and like the entire department to look over that together. And it's a really great way of like having accountability and calling people out in a nice way. Anything else? We have like time for one more question. Right. Right.
Rather than waiting for the whole features for it to be open, you can just start releasing it and say, look, you know, this is this stage where, you know, we're happy to put it out there for the community to help us build it.
Right.
Then you'll know if it's real interest because it's hard to gauge before it's there. A lot of people are like, do you want to make it in essence, of course we do, but I mean, it's hard to really know about this specific piece of software for instance.
Right. That's true also. Like, you know, like I'm a little bit of a perfectionist by nature. And so like, it's like, okay, we need to first have this as a production ready resource. We need to have like, we need to have the uptime for this like to be like 100% and we need to use Kafka instead of delayed jobs because delayed jobs is sometimes a little bit off. And like, there's definitely that perfectionist aspect that goes into it.
No, as long as you're transparent and you put fair warnings on it, you say, you know, this is the thing, this is why we're releasing it, we want people to be able to play with it and help us, and you know, we're open, here's how to contribute, that's really clear.
Yeah.
You want to do like, you know, some of the Google open source projects where it's like, here's the code, fuck off. You know, like, you can't contribute back at some point. Like, not all projects.
That's actually a really good idea. Like, please do all my work. And if any, if anyone in this room wants to change the delayed job server to Kafka, I'll sign you up.
You'd be surprised at like contributions get, sometimes get massive stuff, sometimes get tiny, you know, really directions that are so useful, but you know, you can get expensive, so waiting really is not a great looking strategy.
Yeah, that's true. Like you said, well, a lot of what we talked about is like innovation, and like innovation in open source. That idea also very much applies to open source. Yeah. Yeah. It was really cool. Like, you know, my first open source contribution, which was again back to Breakman. It was the first time I ever contributed to an open source project, and it was, for me, it was really cool because I was like, okay, this is not fitting my needs, and I can just literally build upon it. I can change the classes, like I can get dirty in the code, and like I can just change it to fit my needs, and I benefit other people as well, which is kind of cool. Yeah, well, thank you so much for coming, and you're an awesome audience. There's my thank you slide. What you did?
So I did a survey of about 10 different static code analyzers, and none of them, like this was at C, none of them found more than half the bugs in the bugs I wrote.
Really?
Yeah. So
So what did
not,
you do? I'm so curious to hear.
not only were there lots of false positives, but not more than half the bugs that I deliberately put in code were detected.
Well,
So I really have very little confidence in static code analyzers, and Ruby being a dynamic language is probably 10 times harder to statically analyze.
great. Is there anything that you did to make that percentage higher?
No. So I wrote the very, very simplest code in C. I had a buffer overflow. I had a double free. I had an array going out of that. I had a divide by zero. You know, I had all kinds of things like that. And a lot of the different things did fine things. But I found these false positives, and I would stare at the code for hours and say there's nothing wrong with this code.
Exactly.
This is arrays going out of bounds, and it wasn't.
Right.
So I have very little confidence in static code analyzers.
Yeah.
And it's good to
That
have a
makes sense.
culture, and it's good to have people reviewing things. But if you give them 100 false positives, they're
With
saying,
what?
this isn't helping me.
With her company?
Something
No.
that I really want to implement is where you can basically like write your own matchers,
Right?
and that might help like spot some like specific pattern companies. Specific patterns that people in the company are possibly using.
So,
And of course, you know, we're not going to solve everything through
Sure.
automated scanning, but if we can solve 30% of it through automated scanning,
that's awesome.
that's great.
But,
Yeah.
but if people think my code must be bug-free because it's gone through the analyzer,
Yeah.
then that's,
They have to remember the Dijkstra quote.
yeah.
Exactly.
So, are you familiar with the first Addison Wesley book on Ruby?
Testing, not sure.
So it came came out, I think, in the mid-90s.
Okay.
I was one of the reviewers. My name's in the credits.
Oh, wow.
I have a signed copy of the book.
Oh, wow.
They're both Japanese and American author.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd love to get in touch with you. I would love to also get like, I'm sure you have like good, like I'm sure that, yeah, you have like interesting info on whatever.
You don't know what you don't know.
I have this very old-fashioned thing. It's called a business card.
Oh, cool.
So
Yeah.
unfortunately, I cannot give you a copy of my analysis because
Thanks for
it
coming.
is unreleasable.
Awesome. This is great. Thank you.
Naeem mode.
Naeem Olak here.
I don't think anybody except for you knows me knows that.
Yeah, I don't know what that
No,
means.
mine's actually more of a personal
Dude,
question as well.
you have
I know, I still have it there. I just didn't feel like taking it off. Are you judging me?
yeah, I'm judging.
I just want to say fantastic.
Thank
Well
you so
done.
much.
I really, wow.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you very much. And looking
It
forward
was
to
my
seeing
first
more
speech,
abstracts from you in the
so
future.
okay, thank you.
Yes. Well done.
Thank you.
So I was just going to say that it didn't come off as your first, but I really appreciate how much of your how personal you made it, sharing your background and journey. And as one of the DevOps Days organizers, have you in our track come March, hopefully?
I would love that. Can we?
When's the next DevOps day?
March, next SCaLE.
Oh,
How do we? I'm gonna Carlos
It's normally
Mendoza.
March, but COVID.
I was wondering if they do multiple of them per
I'll
year.
shout you I'll shoot you a message on.
Other
Not-
cities,
not
yes.
out, not
But
out.
No, yeah, they're.
yeah, I looked you up on LinkedIn. It's like, oh, you have like thousands of followers. And I'm like, okay, because we're like 3 degrees apart. It won't let me just like send you a
Okay.
message.
Okay, I'll find you a message.
That's a cool lanyard.
But cool.
Thank you so much.
Lanyard.
Oh, and if I was trying to read in between the lines, because you mentioned your
Thanks.
like credentials and whatnot, but there was like,
I wore it yesterday.
there was
I
like
think.
high school that didn't have funding, and then it was
Yeah.
credentials, so like there's no
Get
college.
Lab.
So I'm actually a college dropout. First I went to like a religious college that my parents wanted me to go to because it was like
Are you actually
girls
gonna wear
only,
it?
super religious. But I was kind of bored, so I switched to NYU. And in order to pay for NYU, I'm like a zero family contribution kind of family. So I was like working a full-time job and then going to college at the same time. And like the classes at NYU, they expect you to do like for a 4-credit class, they expect you to do 16 hours a week of homework. So just managing that was a nightmare.
And trying to work everybody.
Yeah, it's like you're trying to work and you're trying to be amazing at your job, and also you're trying to like get really good grades at the same time. So when COVID happened, it was like a perfect escape for me. I quit my job, I quit college, and like I took that time to go to and learn about security, self-study CISSP, and like land in like a boot camp, and that was like my journey to security. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I hone in on that because as someone that when I hear like these diversity talks and I'm like, yeah, I'm come from a non-traditional background. I got my like master's in liberal arts. I'm like, you went to college like and you're not in debt and like that's not that's not the type of background I'm accustomed to.
Well, that was also the thing. Like it is kind of amazing for me. Just like I've never had like any college debt because I'm just terrified of college. Like I came from a family with absolutely no money, and my parents don't really believe in college, and like my community didn't really believe in college, and I didn't want to take out college debt for college. So I'm like, I'm gonna work these $55,000 every year. So I don't, it's actually funny because in class in NYU, I'd have these girls that were like sitting next to me, and we'd do our work together, and she was like super smart, but it came time to exams, and like, I don't know why people would compare grades, but she was getting like 60s in the class, and the guys behind me were failing. They were getting 40s in class. And I don't know about the guys behind me, but I know that the girl sitting next to me was very, very smart. We used to do our programs together. And I asked her, like, why are you getting 60s? Like, you can do much better than this. And she's like, oh, I was partying yesterday. And I was like,
Same.
no, and I was just like, you fucking idiot. Like, you're spending $55,000 for tuition, and you're using that money to party. There's so many cheaper parties that exist.
Right. I thought you were gonna be like, you even have time for that? Like,
Well, she's probably not paying to go to those parties. She's probably just going to them.
She's paying to go to school. To go
Yeah.
to parties out of school. Someone's paying.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, like, there's better parties out there. And why you
Just go to public school for that.
right?
Is she doing okay these days?
I haven't kept in touch with her. I just was like, it was so shocking to me that somebody would go to a college that they're spending they're taking $55,000 of debt out a year.
Is that what she was doing?
I think so. Either her parents are paying for it, or she must have been taking a college debt.
Right, but right here, with that your non-traditional background, you're looking at things differently
Yeah.
and just attacking things differently. Even how you attack, you even recognize, I went and got these, kind of prestigious credentials that people hold up, and you're like, you went and got that first, just to see if I was into it,
Yeah, because I didn't want to change my whole career like that.
yeah. But you're finding different angles to attack it.
What's- That's a Rush shirt?
It is a Rush shirt.
I've had to make myself stand out differently because I don't have the proper.
I got the lanyard, I got the shirt.
Yeah.
Feels like
And it's
coming
like-
off aces
yeah,
for me today
exactly.
so far. That's good.
Exactly.
What does your
It's so
hat
nice
say?
meeting
So
you.
the
Thanks for
hat
attending
is
the talk.
All Things Open.
Where'd you get that?
At All Things Open.
What is that?
It's a open source conference that's run out of North Carolina, Raleigh Durham area.
Where are you from?
I currently live in Tampa.
Oh, in Florida?
Yeah,
Okay, so you're not in LA, so you go to a lot of conferences, you're not in LA local.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of conferences.
Yeah, then you get nervous in the
Here
middle,
now.
and you're like,
And I
what
still
if-
do some. So this
So
one I do
out of
because
all-
it's very open source.
I thought you did.
Out of all the
Well, I
conferences you
was
could be
actually
at, you decided to come to
surprised that
SoCal
it
Linux
was
Festival. It's not the only
first
Linux
time,
conference.
You came off as
It's the best
Thanks.
one though.
You
I
think
hope to
so?
get more.
Yes.
This is a big for me
So there's
because
that.
this is my
So
first
like All
time.
Things Open is an open source conference. So I would say it's the other best open source conference. Maybe it's the best open source conference. It's the best Linux conference. I don't know. But those are the two that are like on my radar.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Cool.
and then I go to like Postgres conferences, but
Yeah.
like those are Postgres conferences. So like if you're into that, it's great. And if you're not, then
Yeah,
You're saying there's not a lot of them?
the Postgres ones? No, there's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, there used to be more. So pandemic kind of made things weird, but
Okay, thank you so much.
like there's actually one in New York in September. So oddly, I was actually just coming to recruit you to go speak at conferences as well. So it's
Which
good.
conferences are you
So
recruiting
I
for?
work in the.
Because I'm looking for Australia conferences.
Oh,
I can talk to some people. So I work in the Postgres community a lot.
Okay.
And so I was kind of curious, like your company's relationship and like if they allow you to speak wherever and how that works. Or
They love having me speak, and they'll pay for me to speak anywhere. And in fact, my idea for next year is that I want to live in New York and then have my company pay for my travel and speak at conferences outside of the U.S.
That's a very wise move.
Oh,
So
what?
I'm kind of sad because there's a few CFPs that closed like a month ago.
Which
that I would
ones?
totally. So there's a Postgres conference in New York. So I was like, well, that would have been super easy for her to go to. It's in September.
Okay.
And I'm like, that would be. So we need like what I would call like more developer oriented talks, but that also touch on like topics that relate to database stuff.
Right.
So like this seemed like it fit the bill, and this will sound very weird, but I've been doing comms a very long time. So to go in and like just see what what they're all about, and I'm like, dude, she's got it. Like I don't know,
Really?
I don't really know your background or whatever. And I'm like,
Thanks.
very professional, like like I don't know how old you are, but I'm like, she seems very young and like way more professional than I still am at this point. So
Thank you so
like,
much. That's so sweet of you.
So anyway, so
I'm
I
really
was just
flattered.
sort of curious if you had that option.
Yeah, so
and
our
I think the
company
CFP
is-
for the European conference also just closed. So
Which European?
so
conference?
there's a PGConf EU that they do
Okay.
every year. It's like in a different city in Europe. So
Okay.
like this year is Berlin.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, and I mean I don't know. Like I know there's like Open Source Summit. There's a crap ton of conferences
Okay, cool.
around
Yeah,
that I
if you
think
have
this would
any
fit into a lot of
suggestions,
those.
and if you, I don't really know which conferences the best for this kind of talk. I'm not such a conference goer, but I would be thrilled if you had any
So
suggestions.
yeah, what's beautiful about this talk, in my mind, like you're hitting, so like it speaks to developers, it talks about databases, it has security, it touches on open source, like so those are like four, like if you could put it on the blockchain, like you'd hit like every category. So
Oh, really?
which
Okay,
don't
we're-
really put it on
we're
the
gonna put
blockchain. Don't do
blockchain.
that. Don't be like it's gonna be blockchain in Web3. Like that'd be great. So don't do that. But
We're
I
gonna
mean,
do static analysis scans of blockchain. Is
yeah, exactly.
you could probably do something like that for Solidity if they don't already. I don't know how mature Solidity is as a language.
So, like actually, so he had asked, so there's this
conference All Things Open, which
Okay.
is in North Carolina.
Oh, cool.
Their CFP also just closed. They're announcing their speakers. So, but it's an open source one. So if you ask me, would this fit in that conference? Absolutely.
Okay.
If you're not aware of the B-Sides conferences, it's a conference group very much like DevOps Days. And I think this could fit in DevOps Days because you've got automation and automating security is a big thing. So B-Sides and DevOps Days are groups of like local community groups that like there's a parent organization and they do conferences all around the world. And they will usually cover, you know, some level of like speaker travel and whatnot. So if you want to travel, like I would suggest looking at either of those two.
Okay, awesome.
And you just pick the city and see when the CFPs are open. And
Okay, perfect.
yeah, those are.
If you have
those
like
are
also
really
like
good.
any like if you know, I'd love to get in touch with you, and if you have like any suggestions for me.
I accidentally sent you a LinkedIn request
Okay,
about
perfect.
10 minutes ago, so you will see it.
Okay,
If I
perfect.
said accidentally, it was.
Yes, well, I was like, I pushed like the more button, and then I was like, does it? I forget how LinkedIn works. I guess I'm
I
not.
feel like also with like speakers, like you need like a little bit of cred, like you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there's the talk, and then there's also like people who are like deciding on who's speaking,
Yeah.
deciding how much experience you've got, like all these other
Yeah.
small factors that like you need.
But now you have. So I haven't. So there was a thing on your LinkedIn page. It was like an interview you did.
With Chris
I guess. Or,
Roberts?
no, I don't know. It was like a Hasidic Jew and a Muslim like
Yeah,
get
yeah,
together
That's
and.
yeah.
So I haven't
stalked your
like,
LinkedIn, too.
Obviously, I have not watched that. Like I was just sitting back here and like, so I'll tell you like the super weird story. This maybe is borderline creepy.
Okay.
So my wife and I guess we have a nickname for each other, and it's actually Esty. So
No way.
for no particular reason, and so I was like trying to figure out which talk to go to, and I'm like, well, I don't know. Her name's Esty, and I've never met anyone with that name.
so
So I'm just gonna go to that and see if it's good or
That
not.
is so
So that was really the reason I came in here.
It's also
So,
short
but-
for something.
so, Esty, I assume
It's-
it's
it's,
like Jewish.
Yeah,
name
it is Jewish.
for-
It is Jewish. It's Esther.
Yeah, yeah.
Esther, yeah.
Nice biblical name.
Yeah,
Ish.
nice biblical.
So we ended up looking, that's not like neither of us are Jewish, so like, it
That is so,
totally was a weird coincidence that we ended up with that, and then we've met a few people, you know,
That
we've
is
seen online
so
that had that
crazy.
name, but I was like, yeah. So that was the real reason why I actually came in here, but I was like really glad that I did. Because I had no idea, like, you know, I'm like, well, automated security, this sounds like a poor man's snake talk. I don't know, like, you know, but I'm like, but her name's Esty, so it'll be great. So,
I'm so happy you came.
yeah, and I
Does
got
that mean
stuck
that
in
we
the,
need, like, does that mean we need like a better name for the talk?
for the talk,
Well,
I think you could change the name
Yeah.
and highlight certain areas. So like when I walked in, I got stuck in the hallway track. But when I got here, like you're talking
hallway
about,
track.
yeah, I got. So you're talking about SQL injection, right? So it was like, oh, so this is automatically now something I'm more interested in because
Yeah.
I do a lot of database stuff. So, but I think you could, you know, it depends on what you want to highlight in the talk name and in the talk description.
right.
and-
That's true. Also, you can like change it.
yeah, so you can
for-
change it. So like, there's a talk that I've done at a few different conferences, and like the talk is basically the same. You know, 90% of it's the same. But like, so I think the best version is,
You did like A/B testing.
yeah, essentially it's like that. So it's like monitoring. I don't know, monitoring in production.
You did it here?
Like trade-offs. I did it at DevOps Days LA here.
Like just
Like
the other day.
no, like whatever was the last one before the pandemic.
2020, I was there.
Okay, so if you remember, there was a
But I
slide
wasn't.
that
I wasn't
had.
at that talk, but
Okay.
I was. Yeah.
Yeah, so because there was a slide I had where like I talk about in one of these like online role playing games where they introduce a contagion in the game and like it wipes out like everyone in the game because they didn't realize how bad it was gonna be and so that was like right when the pandemic was just being talked about, and I'm like, this is a little bit weird that I'm gonna like go into this little bit, but I already have the slides in, so like it's gonna happen. So.
That's so cool.
But I've done that talk, like slight different versions of that with variously different names around that topic of testing versus monitoring. That was it's about trade-offs. So then you can kind of just, you know, move, if this is more about testing in your conference, then I'll talk about it that angle.
That's so
if you're
smart.
about production stuff, like I can talk on that side.
That's so
So,
smart.
yeah,
Just
if you do enough, so that was so I used to be like, every year I make, you know, 4 new talks or whatever, like that's a grind. So it really is about figuring out like,
come up with a subject, figure out how it can expand and contract, and then, you know, kind of shape it for which
That's so cool.
which place you want to go to.
That's so smart. I'll definitely hit you up and ask you for suggestions.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Referral suggestions.
I'm currently unemployed, so I may be latent on responses.
Okay.
No, I'm not unemployed. I shouldn't say that. I'm on a, what do you call it? It's not a sabbatical, really. I'm on a hiatus. That's the word.
Oh, that's awesome.
That I've told people. So I may be a little higher latency than normal in response, but I also have a lot of spare time, so I'm happy
Okay,
to
perfect.
help out with
Thank
anything.
you so much. I really
So
appreciate
awesome.
it.
No, I really appreciate the talk. It was really good.
Thanks.
So, I'm not looking for a job. Supposed to explicitly say that when people ask me. So.
Well,
people
because you
are
said you're
asking-
unemployed, so like that was
Yeah.
the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah, no, I shouldn't phrase it that way. So, because then people think I'm looking, and I'm like, no, I'm not really looking. So, there you go. I spend my time messing with Postgres. So.
You were on all the Postgres track talks the other day,
Yeah, Thursday I did actually 3 talks with a bunch of people. Because I had spare time because I'm employed. So.
Yeah, I'm a college dropout.
Focus on Ireland and stuff. I find that I actually had to go back and take another just like
Oh, wow.
and it's just what's your name? Robert Tree. So I'm really curious about how I transition from last name to it's unique. Have you ever met anyone with
Are you doing a lot of compliance stuff?
a little bit, and then I also do but not unique like if you wanted to get that in a domain name, it's not where like I am actually handling art every domain name risk and trying to like identify but I'm not the engineer so I'm not
So do people ever tell you to go treat yourself?
I have
I get that all the
okay,
time.
I have a little bit more of like first I do
I have read like one time
but if you I'm also more than happy to
conference I've seen a few years ago they're like
or ideas
the tree
afterwards.
talked about
It also depends like you know
all those jokes.
that's if you want to do engineering what exactly
And the only sad part is
you're
that
interested
sometimes
in
they say
is
it's tree, like
how
you're a
far
tree,
your
and then they misspell my
company's
name.
willing to support
Like,
that.
if you want to hire an engineer myself, they almost hired me as an engineer, but because I have a bigger background in analyst work, they hired me as an analyst. It's great because I'm actually building their security stack and I gotta keep Steam up and running, gotta make sure that all the reporting and orchestration is going on and everything like that. Right? I'm doing analyst work fine, but yeah, and your offer to mentor me like amazing. Just to know how it transitions, how you would recommend the transition from like the more bureaucratic
Side of
part of
it.
it to actually incorporating my computer science
Yeah.
background.
No, so I like I think just the short again like we definitely can talk and if you have like any specific questions. But I think like if I were in your position, I would go and like rally my company for more resources, like for like an education stipend and ask them to put me through some like security engineering training. Yeah, and there's like a few different boot camps I recommend, or maybe like part time, or there's some things that like some additional training that you can do that will kind of like give you that extra background, and having that compliance background can be really valuable together with that.
No, I know. And that's why I was like, okay, I'm okay doing this for a while. And right when I graduated with computer science, I was like, I don't need to use it right away. In fact, I don't want to code as my main job. I want to do security as my main job, so I'm okay with where I'm at. But like being able to bring it back in with just the amazing. So those boot camps, I'm definitely going to be looking for something
There's
related.
boot camps, and then there's also like it depends also if you're planning on like you want to move up in your own job
Okay.
or if you want to go to another company, right? So like if you're trying to move up in your own job, you can start like asking like certain tasks to be like given to you like, for more